first time. Looks like we're up. So, Madam Clerk, I would like to call this March 9th meeting of the City Council of Charleston to order. Madam Clerk, if you'd please call the roll.
Councilwoman Del Chapo.
Here.
Councilmember Shealy.
Here.
Councilmember Saccharin.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Councilmember Brady.
Present.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Waring. Councilmember Seekings. Councilmember Shade.
Present.
Councilmember Griffin. Councilmember Appel.
Here.
Councilwoman Jackson.
Here.
Mayor Tecklenburg.
Here. So thank you. And now if you would like to join us, Councilmember Brady will lead us in an invocation.
Happy to. I want to do a prayer tonight from, it's actually Lord Jacob Astley, who was a royalist commander during the First English Civil War when the Crown opposed Parliament. And it's from the 1642 Battle of Edge Hill, and the prayer's become famous. And my mom actually had this in calligraphy framed in our house, and it had always stuck with me for in kind of divided and trying times. So if you'd bow your head, his prayer was, Lord, thou knowest how busy I must be this day, but if I forget thee, do not thou forget me. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Council Member. And now if you'd like to join me, you can see the American flag to my right and join us for our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation
Under God,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first up on our agenda is presentations, our Holocaust Remembrance Proclamation. Now, I've got this proclamation. It's to observe a week of remembrance in memory of the victims, survivors, rescuers, and liberators of the Holocaust. And rather than read this entire document at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Anita Zucker and Samantha Krantz as they would like to share some thoughts, memories, and the importance of this observance, not only in our city, but in the world. Anita? Anita, you're on.
You muted, Anita.
there we go. Thank you, Mayor Tecklenburg and honorable council members. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, even though this is for a very sad moment, but very special in the life of my family. We appreciate you presenting us with a proclamation remembering the Holocaust. This is a proclamation from the city. And for those of you that don't know me, I am Anita Zucker, and my parents were persecuted due to their religion. They were beaten, they were starved, they were forced to do labor, yet somehow they survived. They spent years hiding in the forests, and it's a miracle that I'm here with you today because somehow they survived, and I'm very lucky. And we today are remembering the 6 million and the liberators and those others who died during that time. And but I would like you to know that I hope you will celebrate this this memory in time, and I hope we won't ever have to deal with things like this again in our lives. But we ask the Charleston community and the world to join us on April the 11th at 4 p.m. for the Charleston Jewish Federation's 2021 Yom HaShoah program. And Yom HaShoah means Holocaust Memorial Day. And it is a program, again, to honor the victims who perished in the Holocaust. This year's theme is Why We Remember. And it will display the importance of generational remembrance. And of course, for me, I remember because of my family, the Zucker family, the Goldberg family, the Meebab family, the Popowski and the Kornblut families who were lost during that time. We had quite a number of family members. And again, so that's why I remember. The event includes the reading of the names of people who perished during the Holocaust with family connections to Charleston, performances, and the keynote speaker is Herschel Greenblatt, a Holocaust survivor born in the caves of the Ukraine. Herschel Greenblatt survived the Holocaust because of the resourcefulness and the determination of his parents in evading the Nazis. As he states, it is because of my parents' unwavering will that we were able to survive the horrors of the Holocaust. And Herschel's granddaughter works with us at the Charleston Jewish Federation. So if you need to learn more and you want to find out and join us that day, you can contact remember@jewishcharleston.org. Thank you so much for your commitment to Holocaust awareness and making sure we never forget the lessons of the Holocaust. I actually brought a candle along, and I hope through my screen I might get you to see this candle. And it doesn't, there, it's coming.
It's
I do have
transparent.
a candle I would like to light in memory of those, and hope you will join me in thinking about the victims of that time in our lives. Oh, and Mayor, you have yours lit. Thank you. I'm gonna light mine.
I forgot mine. You got yours, Keith.
Yes, I do. Stay there. Stay back.
Can I stay right here?
Sure. Thank you so much for honoring us in this way. I do have my candle and I can't make it show, but I'm trying.
I
So-
see David though in the background now. Hey,
Yes,
David.
he's just joined me.
Hello,
He's just
Mayor.
joined me.
Council members.
Anyway, thank you so much for honoring our community. We greatly appreciate it, and we do hope you'll join us. And we will have people from all over the world. And again, we'll also be on Facebook Live. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for being with us. Samantha, would you like to add any remarks? Samantha Krantz has been a wonderful leader at the College of Charleston and for our youth, particularly when it comes to remembering the Holocaust. Samantha?
Thank you, Mayor. Anita said everything perfectly. And we just thank you and the city for everything you do to honor and remember the people that were perished in the Holocaust, all you do for our Holocaust survivors and our memorial downtown. So thank you. And thank you again for setting this week aside to really remember the Holocaust. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
We will never forget. We will never forget Anita and Samantha.
Thank you.
We look forward to joining you at the Yom HaShoah in April. And we will remember the whole week of remembrance in the city of Charleston by my proclamation, and also that day. Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Shade.
I just want to thank Anita for all the work that she's done for our community, in particular for her advocacy for us to remember these events. And Anita, would you just mind repeating the date and the time, location of the April 11th service?
Sure. It's going to be on April 11th at 4 p.m. It will be virtual. So if you go to remember at jewishcharleston.org, you can go in and ask for the link, and you'll be able to get online to join us for our virtual remembrance. But also it will be on Facebook Live under the Charleston Jewish Federation. Thank you, Peter Shade. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Anita.
All right, thank you. So next on our agenda is another proclamation, as we do every year, recognizing our incredible partner in the American Red Cross. They help our community in so many ways. And some folks don't realize this, but whenever there's a fire, for example, and a family is displaced, the Red Cross is always there stepping up, helping our citizens in their time of need. And of course, we've had to remember too many times with natural disasters and hurricanes that occur, that they're always there to help us. And of course, distributing blood in our community where it's needed in our medical needs. So Again, I have a proclamation, and the month of March is American Red Cross Month, but rather than listen to me recite all this, I'd like to call on Ashley Henyon and Katerina Forging to share some remarks with us about the incredible work and partnership we have with the American Red Cross. Ashley?
Yes, thank you so much, council members, and of course, Mayor Tecklenburg and some of his staff members who I work closely with throughout the year, Richard Giroux and Mike Wack, the entire team at the City of Charleston. You guys are always supporting our life-saving work, and it's awesome. I also want to recognize Katerina Fajording. She is the vice chair of our Low Country Red Cross Chapter Board of Directors, and she's taken some time out of her evening tonight to join us for this incredible honor. The Red Cross has been dedicated to saving lives for almost 140 years now. And the way that we do this is by meeting the needs of the local community first, and then always standing ready to join together with other Red Cross regions and chapters around the country to help out our neighbors in need. 1 year ago, I joined this exact council meeting for the Red Cross Month proclamation in person. And little did I know that the world would change drastically within just a few days after meeting you, Mayor Tecklenburg, and many of the other ones on this call for the very first time. But the thing that has stayed the same over this last very unique year is the mission of the Red Cross. No matter what happens outside of our organization, we remain dedicated to our mission and our life-saving work and alleviating human suffering. Of course, how we carry that out might look a bit differently during a global pandemic, but it's all only possible with the help of volunteers. And that's why I'm proud to be here today to help celebrate Red Cross Month during the month of March, because 90% of all the work we do is done by trained and dedicated Red Cross volunteers. So thank you again for your partnership, Mayor Tecklenburg and the City of Charleston. This is a wonderful recognition of our work. I do want to invite Katerina to add anything if she would like.
Yes, Katerina, good to see you.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, good to see you, and council members too. And thank you, Ashley. And also I should say thank you, Anita, because Anita is also a major contributor to the Red Cross Force. So yes, you know, the life-saving donations of blood is one of the most crucial things we work with. We supply blood to over 30 hospitals in the South Carolina region, and that's only possible with the help of donors and community partners. The partnership we have with the City of Charleston is essential to saving lives in the state, especially after this trying year. Our partners in the city host blood drives on a regular basis, so you have 4 times a year. And I know that Mayor Tecklenburg often rolls up the sleeves and donates blood. It's such a precious gift, and we are so dependent on it. We are very grateful for the partnership we have with the City of Charleston, and we look forward to continue this partnership in a professional and an excellent manner that we've been having up to now. And you have helped us collect 140 pints of life-saving blood this year. So we are very grateful, and so are those who receive this life-saving gift. So thank you so much, and looking forward to another prosperous year together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katerina, for what you do as well. And we in addition to all of our other partnerships, we have blood drives regularly at the City of Charleston. I welcome our council members to participate. It's given the gift of life, and we're just so happy to have your support and partnership when things are needed in our community. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you.
So next up is our approval of City Council minutes from February 23rd.
Move for approval, Mr. Mayor.
Any
Second.
additions? Any comments, additions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the ayes have it. If I could beg of council that we allow Dr. Sweat to address us prior to public participation. He is here to make some comments on our COVID-19 update, but he has some commitments this evening. So we won't take the full discussion if that's okay, the pleasure of council, but just allow Dr. Sweat to make his comments to us, update from the medical university regarding COVID-19, and then we'll move on to our public participation period. Is that okay with everybody? All right. Without objection, Dr. Sweat, are you out there? Would love to hear from you.
I'm here.
Yes,
Can you hear
sir.
me okay?
You are. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you, Mayor Tecklenburg and Tracy also, and the council members. I really appreciate the opportunity to be invited back and do a brief update with you on the COVID situation. Let me just put the screen up here. So just to start off, I do want to note that we're about a year into this pandemic. And 1 year ago today, on March 9th, there were 603 cases of COVID that have been diagnosed in the United States, mostly in urban centers, and there were 22 deaths. And here we are a year later, and we now have 29 million diagnosed cases and over 525,000 people who've lost their lives to COVID. So it's been quite a year. And I think we've learned a lot, and we're probably getting to a point where we have some optimism. So I do want to share with you our status and where we're headed, I think. This is for the Tri-County area, the Charleston area, just some of our indicators that we've been tracking. And the cases per day per 100,000 population, that's a 7-day average looking over time, 21 cases per day per 100,000, and it's been declining substantially. The test positivity is at about 6.3%, another important indicator. We really normally like to see that number go below 5, and it has been going up and down a bit. The medical capacity has improved substantially. You can see there's 64% of ICU beds. That's a normal rate that we would normally see. We were up in the 90s weeks ago. So thank goodness the mortality has begun to drop off.
Dr. Sweat, if I may interrupt you, we still see the very first slide that you've got in your presentation. I don't know if you can adjust it to move through the slides, but if not, we'll be happy just to listen to you.
I think let me just fix something here. I think I can get this to go. Okay. So are you able to see the changes?
Now it's changing. Yes, sir.
Okay, I apologize for that.
No problem.
Yeah, so just moving back to this graphic, the reproductive number, which is the number of people each person infect, has dropped below 1, which is a good sign. If that goes down much lower, we'll start to see significant declines. If you can get that close to 0, this epidemic would disappear. I'm going to talk in a second about variants, but we are seeing a significant number of variants popping up in the area. Unfortunately, the most common variant that's being detected is this South African variant. And I'll come back to this in a minute and talk about the implications of that. And currently, as of the most recent report I've seen, 21% of the population in the Tri-County area have been vaccinated. This is just a graph showing the trend we've seen over the past, since the summer, really. Here we have our summer wave that occurred, and here was our wave that occurred over the holiday period and after. And there's just a couple of points I want to make. It is great news that this is declining so rapidly. We're down to 21 cases per day per 100,000. But the trend is similar to what we saw after the summer decline. And so I just want people to realize that just because it is declining, we're still at a relatively high rate, and the same pattern of decline is occurring. We have about the same number of cases right now as we had just before, right around the beginning of December. So 21 cases per day per 100,000, still pretty high, and does represent substantial risk of people becoming infected in the population. We've been doing some estimations looking at sort of total immunity that we have in the area, combining both people vaccinated and also people who were infected in the last 3 months who likely have some natural immunity. And it's about 40% for Charleston County. The vaccination rate in the county is around 25%, and about 15% of people have had an infection, estimated to have an infection over the past 3 months. So we're at about 40%. People with immunity, meaning about 60% of people are still potentially vulnerable to becoming infected. And the question that comes up a lot is, when would we reach herd immunity? So herd immunity is really when there's enough immunity in the community that the virus doesn't have many opportunities to transmit, and it'll lead to a rapid decline. We're not there yet, and it's not clear exactly what level of immunity we need to see to achieve herd immunity. It's likely somewhere between 60% and 90%. The more transmissible a virus is, the more it's easy to transmit, the higher it takes in terms of immunity. The larger, you need more immunity to suppress and reach herd immunity. So we don't quite know, but we are moving in the right direction. I did want to touch on the variants. It's quite a concern in the community, people examining this. These are just mutations that have occurred in the virus. They happen naturally, but they increase in frequency when there's a lot of transmission. So we've really seen these coming out of locations like South Africa and Brazil, also the Los Angeles area, New York as well, where there's a lot of transmission going on. So we need to reduce transmission to slow getting new variants. And the problem with these variants are they have several problems. One is they transmit much more easily. And it's not exactly clear the number, but 2 to 3 times more easily is what frequently is cited. And every one of these variants transmits more easily. The UK variant also has been documented to have worse health outcomes, higher mortality, and more severe disease. And then some of these variants seem to have a concern about evading immunity that could lead to a situation where vaccines will become less effective. People might be able to get reinfected with the new variants if they've had the old one earlier. And treatments such as monoclonal antibodies are, in some cases, are not effective with variants. And the South African variant is particularly of concern. There's a particular mutation in that variant that is of great concern. And the Brazilian variant as well is of concern. This was just pulled this today, showing they only sequence these viruses about 0.5% of the ones that are collected. And so of that small sample, this is what was shown up in South Carolina. The UK variant, the CDC is reporting 13 and DHEC is reporting slightly less, but you can see it's 13 cases for the UK. And for the South African variant, there has been 32 cases out of the small samples that they've sequenced, predominantly in the PD area, Florence, Myrtle Beach, that area, and also some in the low country. This has been going up over the past couple of weeks. So this has increased. And I just wanted to make one point that if you look at the CDC data about the national distribution of variants, South Carolina has over 40% of the reported variants of the South African version. So that's a big concern. It's mostly spread out all over the country in small spots, but we're seeing this fairly high level in the PD area. And interestingly, we don't have that much of the UK variant. So we really have to keep our eyes on this variant, and it does pose a concern. Just have 2 slides to end. Risk going forward, I think there is a potential for another surge. I hate to say it. Hopefully it won't happen, but we have about 60% of the population vulnerable right now. I do believe that because the vaccination efforts have been targeted towards older population who have worse health outcomes, we're likely to see a less impact on hospitalizations and on mortality. And we're definitely seeing rapidly declining people being hospitalized currently. But many older people also did not get vaccinated. So there are still a substantial number of people who haven't been vaccinated to date who are in older age groups. And I would point out too that because young people get infected, it is a bad thing. It causes a lot of damage. About 10% of people suffer from long-term COVID problems. There's a lot of attention being given to that. And about 30% of those people who have long COVID report they never had symptoms or had mild symptoms. So we really, you can't neglect the impact of transmission and infection among younger people as well. I mentioned the viral mutations. It's something that we really have to keep our eye on. And it, I think, reinforces our need to keep our vigilance up. There's a lot of fatigue, patience is low, but we're getting closer to normalization, I believe. I would think by the summer, if we can get vaccination rates up, we're going to be in a much, much stronger position, and we can begin to start loosening up some of the restrictions. But people do need to be vigilant a little bit longer, I believe, with mask use and distancing, particularly with these variants on the scene. Also, there's a lot of what I would refer to as risk compensation, but people are now becoming very optimistic, and they should be, because we have vaccines and the case rates are coming down. But that can lead to increased risk behavior in terms of not wearing masks and gathering. So it's another concern. And there's a lot of challenges to moving forward with vaccination. We need to make it easier. We need greater supply to do that. Lessons learned and global work around vaccinations is you really need to get out and go to the people and not have the people come to you. And also there's a lot of false information and conspiracy theories, which really need to be tackled. And we need to really attend to equity and delivery. Some of the groups, such as African Americans, who have the worst, they've had the highest rates, the worst health outcomes, are also having lower rates of vaccination. So I know a lot of attention is being given to that, but these are challenges going forward. And then I just want to end on some optimism. It is remarkable that we have these vaccines. Historically, it's taken over 10 years to develop a vaccine. The fastest has ever been developed is 4 years. So getting a vaccine, these vaccines within 1 year, is a remarkable feat of science. The supply is increasing. I do believe based on all the reports that I've seen, we're going to see steady increases in supply. And they do right now appear to be effective against the current variants that are out there. So that's also good news. That could change if we saw substantially more mutation in the virus. But to date, the current vaccines do appear to be effective, and there's still studies going on that. And also our ability to adapt these vaccines to mutations is really excellent. In particular with the mRNA vaccines of Pfizer and the Moderna, it's very easy to rapidly change the formula for the vaccine. And now the production's up. I think if we can keep on top of the genetics, we can keep these vaccines, active. It may mean that probably will mean we're going to need to have booster shots in the future. It might look a lot like an annual flu vaccine. There's a lot more capacity coming online to detect these variants. Global surveillance is increasing to look for new coronaviruses that might come. This is the third we've had in a short order, and we need to be vigilant about other ones. And many, but not all people have really learned how to function safely during the pandemic. So I think that's a positive thing that we just have to reinforce for a little longer. And the willingness to take vaccines is slowly increasing. So that's another reason for us to be optimistic. So in summary, I'd say, I think if you had to balance optimism and pessimism, I'd be on the optimistic side, but we need to stick with it a little bit longer. That's, I think, the key message that I have tonight. So again, thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer questions, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Sweat. I'm pleased to hear your glass is half full. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Dr. Sweat. While we got you here, I was going on the DHEC website earlier today. So what I observed on that website is that about 10% of the state's population has been fully vaccinated, and I think about 20% have received at least the first dosage. Is that about your understanding as well? Those numbers about right?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit higher, but that's about right. Yeah, 20% is about right.
And we've heard this term herd immunity. I mean, it's been sort of batted around a pretty good bit, and you talked about it a little bit a few moments ago. Can you just sort of elaborate on that? Exactly what is herd immunity? What does it mean? And
Yeah, you know, one thing I want to say about herd immunity, it's not like a light switch you turn on and off. You don't just reach herd immunity and the switch turns and everything gets better. It's more like a dimmer switch. So the more every vaccination we get will have an impact on the ability of that virus to transmit. But it really relates to social networks. And if the more and more people who are vaccinated, it just breaks down the ability of the virus to transmit through social networks. And there is a threshold you reach where it stops the transmission. It'll eventually die off. So that's really what herd immunity is. And it's very desirable that we get there because it will stop the continued development of these variants, which is really important. So I think this is an issue where everybody's behavior with getting a vaccine affects everybody else. We will never get back to complete normal if we don't get large numbers of people to be vaccinated and reach herd immunity. And one more point I want to make is we're going to need to do this globally. It's not just in our borders. So a big task ahead is going to be to build up capacity for low-income countries to have vaccinations. And if we don't do that, we're going to suffer here. So, we need to get these numbers up. I think we're going to do it. And then our next big task is to tackle this globally.
Excellent point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Sweat? Councilmember Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Sweat, I'll tell anybody, I think our city has done a wonderful job through the mayor and our councilman, staff, and citizens, and trying to lead the way in wearing masks and safe distance, and obviously washing our hands. But is it your professional opinion, when I see the U.S. Congress meets in person, of course they safe distance, the U.S. Senate meets in person. As a matter of fact, they worked almost through the night to pass the $1.9 trillion budget. I see our General Assembly, both Senate and Houses meeting. Do you believe we can meet in person, safe distance, that makes sense for the city of Charleston?
I do believe.
Or is it your opinion those bodies should not be meeting in person?
Sometimes you have to meet. And when you're going to meet, ventilation,
Right.
Distance, and mask really work. They're not 100% perfect.
Yes, sir.
And we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. But at the same time, if you can avoid meeting, it's better to avoid it at this state. And I think once people are vaccinated, it'll add another variable into this. So, I do think people have learned to navigate through this. Schools have been relatively safe too, when the protocols are followed properly. And the number one way people are becoming infected, there's two. One of them is restaurants, indoor restaurant visits, and bars. And it's largely because you can't eat or drink with the mask, and these are enclosed spaces. So the science is strong on this, strong enough to know that if you do follow these precautions, you're going to dramatically limit the transmission. And it's better to avoid indoor, closed, poorly ventilated meetings with people, especially large groups, without a mask. So
yes, sir, I appreciate your opinion. And I know I'm kind of putting you in a little vice on this one, but I don't want you to get, I don't want to get political with you, but I think symbolism matters. And when I see the president to the microphone with a mask on and the vice president standing at a safe distance with a mask on, providing leadership on this vaccine, and obviously the number of shots in arms, I think that resonates across the country, not with everybody, but I do believe with the vast majority of people. this council, I believe we're approaching now almost 50% of its membership having been vaccinated. And I don't even know beyond this, my voice right now, that's been pushed out. I think that matters to people in the district you represent or even the church that you go to. So when I see us on Zoom, remember a year ago, it's been a year since we've met in person. A year ago, we knew as lay people virtually nothing about this virus. A year later, my God, we know a whole lot more. So your point about navigating at times in person, I agree with. We're able to navigate and go to church. And it's my belief that us practicing some of the best steps that you just said, the mask, the safe distancing, and of course, washing your hands, that we can do the business of the people in a little bit more transparent way than we're currently doing. And I'll bring that up later on, but I really appreciate your professionalism and the information that you brought today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question or comment for Dr. Sweat? Well, thank you again, Doctor, for being with us. We appreciate your partnership with us for the last year. It's been really remarkable between the Medical University and the city and our other health care partners in the region. But y'all have been terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here tonight.
So next up is our citizens participation period. Madam Clerk, do you want to lead us off on that? I see maybe a question from Councilmember Shade before we get started.
Mayor, if you could just give me 1 second of personal privilege. I was waiting for Councilmember Waring to join us for the council meeting and give him a huge recognition. Sunday, he was one of 19 members of our Catholic community to have received a papal honor. This is an honor from the Pope himself.
Wow.
I'm going to mispronounce the name of the award. It's called the Benemente Medal, and is awarded to those who are either clergy or laity in recognition of their service to the church. And his recognition was for his fine and outstanding financial advice that he's given to the diocese. And so this is a well-recognized, well-deserved award. And I just want the council to be aware of that, the public to be aware of council member and Mr. Waring's contributions to our community and to his church. And I just want to give him a big shout out and let y'all know, be aware of what he was recognized for on Sunday.
That's terrific. Congratulations, council member. That's terrific.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councilman Shaid and Councilman Gregory for actually being to the cathedral, for that wonderful occasion. But I really accepted it. And we all know, being involved in our churches, respective churches, it is the pastor, it is the membership, and we all do this together. So as I told the bishop, I accepted it on behalf of St. Patrick's Catholic Church and obviously my family and then myself. I want to be way at the back of the line because there's so many other people that equally are, if not more so, deserving than I. But it was very touching, very, very touching. So thank you so much, Councilman Shaid and Councilman Gregory, sacrificing and being there.
Great, terrific. Wow, that's a really nice honor. And I know, I don't know if y'all read about Pope Francis's visit to Iraq. He's an amazing leader, world leader, and advocate for peace. Anybody who gets a papal award from Pope Francis deserves an honor. God bless you. That's terrific.
Thank you so much. Don't make me cry because that's a bad sight to see me cry.
All right. So
well
now,
done.
Madam Clerk, will go to you for citizens participation period.
Yes, sir. We have 13 people signed up to speak. And would you like to set a time limit?
In consideration of our other business, let's say 90 seconds for everybody. Yes, ma'am.
All right, the first speaker we have is Tony Daniel. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Tony Daniel.
Good afternoon, council members and mayor.
Yes,
I'd like
sir.
to give a shout out to Ross Appel, who's been helping me try and get my road situation straight. I'm a bit concerned. I don't understand why it's so complicated. City council met in 1976, and they said that you cannot close the road to Frampton and you cannot close Fairway Drive. What we've got is an affluent section of the neighborhood taking advantage of the lesser priced houses in the neighborhood. And there are specific rules, court cases. It is City of Rock Hill versus Cochran that says you can only close a road if it's in the best interest of all concerned. A public street may not be vacated for the sole purpose of benefiting an abutting owner, which is the Fairway Drive section. And then on the other hand, it must be clear that no consideration other than public interest could have prompted the action. That's Baptist versus City of Malden. That is the basis for closing a road. And here there's an obvious disparity between one side of the neighborhood and the other. My side of the neighborhood is blocked. I can't get in and out of my driveway. It's a dangerous situation. My father had a stroke. EMS was impeded getting in the driveway. He's sitting beside me now. He's 91 years old. The likelihood of him having another stroke is 50% higher. And I don't understand why there's difficulty. Maybe they don't want to open up the street, but there are alternatives. There's another access road to come in to the school. And it's not just the school. The entire neighborhood has been shifted from their side, which is empty, to my side, which is busy as can be. I did not realize when I sent an HEIC file that nobody could read. Thank you very much. I hope Ross will send me something.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jeffrey Robert. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Jeffrey Robert.
Yes, I'm on the line. Could you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Mayor and City Council, I appreciate taking the time. Regarding the affordable housing ordinance to workforce opportunity zone, I have the distinction and the honor of being, I think, the only developer when this original rule was promulgated back in 2017 to be on your committee, and the only developer, to the best of my knowledge, that spoke at City Council in favor of the inclusionary zoning and the fee in lieu. While this change in the ordinance is pretty steep, I've come to reflect that the equities in downtown Charleston really need to be more reflective of people who can't afford to live here in those communities, especially in the business core and the central business district. Something really needs to be done to keep them in here and to put them in here. So I am very supportive of this ordinance, very supportive of what the Community Development Committee has done, the administration with you, Mayor. I think you've made great strides, and special compliments to Gianna Shaw Johnson, who has done a miraculous job in the 10 years that I know her, and even doing affordable housing projects with the department and with the city as a private for-profit developer with efficiencies that we could bring to bear for the public good. So again, I'm very supportive of this, and hope that if there's any small little adjustments and tweaks to get this formula just right, so it provides maximum productivity to get Gianna's department what she needs, I'm happy to assist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Appreciate it very much.
Next is Brian Turner. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Brian Turner.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm Brian Turner, Advocacy Director with the Preservation Society. And we very much echo the comments of Mr. Roberts. We also support a revised workforce housing district ordinance to prioritize the development of lower income housing and keep our city vibrant and diverse. The MU districts offer extraordinary density and height benefits in exchange for developers' commitment to these efforts. Yet the pricing of fee in lieu payments have proven ineffective in achieving these goals. The tiered pricing plan tied to successive quarters of each development will better motivate the private sector to actually build housing rather than punt the responsibility to the city, where higher transaction costs result in less efficient outcomes. If anything, we support raising the fees that will further deter in lieu of payments. Relatedly, we support a revised conservation development ordinance as a common sense policy to protect our natural and cultural heritage. However, we would support a revision to Clause 9D which allows for 75% of existing wetlands to count towards a development's common open space requirement. This threshold is too high and will have the effect of reducing the public benefit of these developments. I want to thank you all for your public service and thanks for your consideration of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Next is Cashin Drolet. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Cashin Drolet.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Cashin Drolet with Historic Charleston Foundation. Affordable housing is one of Charleston's greatest challenges and has approached a crisis level. Through HCF's work with the CRC and the PCLT, HCF is a committed partner of the city in addressing this crisis. Mixed-use workforce housing zoning has been an important tool in the city's tool belt with over $11 million collected for workforce housing. So with just one of the 14 MUWH completed projects dedicating workforce units and the remainder electing to pay the fee, we think it's time to revisit the ordinance and the fee structure. And we're encouraged by the creative approach brought forward by the Community Development Committee, and we're generally supportive of a fee increase. However, we do have some questions and concerns about the proposal, its implementation, and the affordability periods, and we look forward to working with council and staff to address those. I'd additionally like to speak in favor of conservation development ordinance approved by the Community Development Committee, as it will afford further protection of the city's historic structures, wetlands, trees, and cultural resources in suburban areas of the city. The ordinance is consistent with recommendations made in the Dutch dialogues, as it will allow for prioritization of development on high ground, protect natural and cultural assets, and avoid placement of future residents in risky areas, and respectfully would encourage council to give first reading to that ordinance this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drolet. Appreciate it.
Next is Leslie Armstrong. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Leslie Armstrong.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I wanted to say that it's very nice that the city proclaimed that next month we'll have a week of remembrance of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. And it's nice the city encourages citizens to confront intolerance and hate whenever and wherever it occurs. Some of my husband's relatives were killed in concentration camps. So I want none of us to ever forget what happened 80 plus years ago in Germany. But the nebulous words contained in the city's resolutions and proclamations do not mean anything when the city refuses to take strong action to stand up against white supremacy and neo-Nazism. In March of last year, the Southern Poverty Law Center put out a report that shows that white nationalist hate groups in the United States increased 55% throughout the Trump era. And you have all seen evidence that we have plenty of white supremacists right here in Charleston, terrorists who blatantly threaten violence against those who are standing up and speaking out against racism and hatred. With Trump gone, we are now at a turning point in our country and in Charleston. The city can continue to do the easy stuff like making proclamations and resolutions, or it can do the hard work it will take to crack down on the white supremacists in our area. I'm sure most of you have heard the quote by death camp survivor and Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal. For evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing. According to Merriam-Webster, the term confront means face up to or meet face to face. Keep that definition in mind when I ask you city council members to heed your own proclamation and confront intolerance and hate wherever and whenever it occurs. If you do so, I guess I'll see you at the Battery this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong.
Thank you.
Next is CJ Westfall. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, CJ Westfall. Next is James Bessinger. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, James Bessinger.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, how are y'all doing? Thank you for taking my call. I just want to say I know I speak on behalf of a lot of people, and I think it is absolutely laughable that you all still feel the need to hide behind computer screens to avoid facing the people of this city who deserve to see you face to face and deal with you about a few things. You felt the need to raise taxes on homeowners and businesses on an unprecedented level to save the city. You borrowed $40 million. You spent $27 million on a parking garage built on land you gave away. You've taken actions that have led to businesses closing and families losing their homes. On top of all that, now you pay unsworn officers to patrol our streets, harass our residents, and steal even more money out of their pockets while they're trying to feed their families and keep the roofs over their heads. You should all be ashamed of the way you've handled this entire mask ordinance bullshit. It's a joke. You've made a laughingstock of our city, and it's clear that because you don't know how to manage an economy, you now want to go out of the way to take more money from the people, and that's a shame. You should be ashamed of yourself, and this city really deserves better. Thank you.
Next is Rita Kazurskis, and if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Rita Kazurskis.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. How many of you have been to the Battery on the weekend when Flags of the South comes out to wave their white supremacist flags? A show of hands, please. If you haven't, please stop by this Sunday anytime from about 10 a.m. to noon. Come see what it feels like. Well, I understand that it's not illegal for the hate group Flags of the South, formerly known as the South Carolina Secessionist Party, to wave the flag of the Ku Klux Klan every weekend in White Point Gardens and terrorize the thousands who pass. And I understand it's not a crime for the Flags of the South to suggest the city erect a statue to the white supremacist terrorist who shot more than 70 bullets and stole the lives of 9 beautiful people. And I understand it's not a crime for the Flags of the South to make posts inviting folks to a public hanging in the backyard or for Timbo to want to sell his boiled peanuts there. What I don't understand is why you, the powers that be, continue to bend and ignore the laws of our city to welcome this hate group to occupy our park every weekend with their flags of church bombers and segregationists to celebrate their heritage of white supremacy while encouraging others to do the same. Unless y'all support celebrating white supremacy in our park every weekend, I do not understand why you allow this to continue. You have the power to change things and the responsibility to keep people safe. Let's go. Enforce the existing code. This group attacked a man and broke a flagpole over his back on videotape. Establish no protest zones on the Battery and eliminate these oversized flags and flagpoles. I hope you can make time to come out or at least drive by this Sunday. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next is Judy Spellman. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Judy Spellman. All right, next, Theo Cogdill. If you're on the line, if you could press *6.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm a member of the United Front of Charleston. I'm calling regarding the activity of racist hate groups in Charleston, in particular the Flags Across the South group that regularly displays divisive white supremacist flags and other symbols. I teach my history and government students that racism and white supremacy should not and will not be tolerated. I commend the Council for including recognition of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, in this meeting. Just like it's important to speak out against racial hatred in history, it is vital to speak out against racial injustice in our own time. It is deeply concerning to me that the Council made the decision to pass a resolution against hatred and division that did not directly name the perpetrators of white supremacy in our city today. The United Front has drawn attention to many instances of police bias when it comes to enforcement of local laws and ordinances, as well as constitutional rights at the Battery and other locations. Why is the city government allowing a police department that has repeatedly demonstrated bias in favor of white supremacists to dictate citizens' First Amendment rights by deciding whether or not to grant protest permits? I urge the Council to take a serious look at these issues and to take action in order to protect the rights of marginalized citizens. I also urge Councilman Harry Griffin to resign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jason Jones. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6. Jennifer Trudeau, if you're on the line, if you could press *6. Mohammed Idris, if you're on the line, if you could press *6.
Hi, this is Jennifer Trudeau. I'm sorry, I was having a malfunction. Can I still speak?
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I just want to raise the issue of the mandates and the ordinances that you guys are talking about. I appreciate the reports earlier. I am a little bit dismayed at the ignoring the detrimental effects that this is having to our society, to our children, and in particular to people like me who are being harassed by the livability officers in front of our children when we have medical conditions. And I don't understand why the livability department is employed with enforcing the ordinances, and they are not including the medical exemptions and the religious exemptions that they have in the ordinance. And it seems to me that there's not a lot of training involved in this ordeal. And I think that that's a pretty bad situation when you leave mothers with medical conditions and their terrified children being harassed and threatened with the police over not wearing a mask. Also, I know that you guys have received a cease and desist letter from my lawyer, as well as a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request, with several points of information that we're requesting. And I look forward to your guys' personal response. I know that we haven't received one from you yet, although the corporate attorney has sent one. And I'm really looking forward to some sort of back and forth here, and hopefully we can work together to make sure that everybody is treated fairly and equally in this situation. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to go back and call out some of the other names.
Yes, ma'am.
CJ Westfall.
CJ, you out there?
Judy Spellman. Jason Jones. Muhammad Idris. All right, and then we did receive some comments by phone and online, and those were sent to council in advance of the meeting. 22 people opposed extending the mask mandate an additional 60 days and said mask wearing should be optional. 5 people asked to extend the mask mandate for an additional 60 days. The healthcare workers are working timelessly to vaccinate people, and to discontinue the mandate would be selfish and uncaring. 7 people said to stop the hate campaign and ban hate groups like Flags Across the South. 4 people said the display of Confederate flags should be banned in the city of Charleston. And those were all the comments that we received.
Well, thank you, Madam Clerk. Appreciate that summary of all. And now if there's no further comment, we'll move on to petitions and communications. First up is our report from the Resiliency and Sustainability Advisory Committee. And we met again just a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted Katie McCain to keep everyone somewhat up to date briefly on our climate action plan that she's been working so hard on. Katie?
Great, thank you, Mayor. So the Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee met on February 18th. All 13 members were present. First on the agenda was an update from Mark Wilbur about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Peninsula Flood Risk Management Study, which was also a part of the City Council workshop that happened later that day. And then next on the agenda, I gave an update about the progress of the Climate Action Plan, which is obviously an effort that is currently underway. There are over 150 volunteers in the 5 subcommittees and the Climate Action Task Force that have been meeting all winter. I believe over 25 meetings have occurred so far, and these groups are at the point where they're finalizing their recommendations, so that's really exciting. A second community survey to gather more public input was released this week, and I'll be sure to share that with all of you so you can pass it along to your constituents as you see fit. And then a final draft of the Climate Action Plan will be presented at the next meeting of the Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee, which is on April 8th. And then after that committee moves to approve the report, then it would come before City Council, potentially the end of April or early May. Next on the agenda, we reviewed and discussed some of the policies that are being considered in the draft Climate Action Plan. There were about 10 potential policies that were discussed. And specifically, the next item on the agenda, we looked more closely at one of those policies, and we talked about the challenges and some potential ways to address gas-powered leaf blowers. Finally, there was a public comment period and 2 people chose to speak. And that was all for that meeting. So the next meeting will be April 8th. And as I mentioned, that's when our final draft of the climate action plan will be presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie? We'll have a definitive draft of that plan for you after the next Sustainability Advisory Committee. And one of those items on the action plan will be to address gas-powered leaf blowers. And I want to let y'all know that Councilmember Seekings had specifically requested that we include that item as one of those action items. But if you want to address that at this point, Councilmember, or just wait until we bring the draft plan to council.
When the draft plan comes, I think that'd be the time, appropriate time, Mr. Mayor.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Katie. I mean, you can hear from all the meetings she's been having with all those volunteers that this has been a very robust effort, a lot of community engagement, and good work will come of it. One example, as Councilmember Griffin noted earlier today, is our desire to convert to electric vehicles. And I did want to just point out, Councilmember, on that is just a grant application. We have not received the grant yet, so we're applying for the grant for those electric garbage trucks. But we're certainly hopeful and hopeful that we're going to be awarded that later this year. All right, thank you, Katie. So next up is our update on city's response to COVID. We already heard the excellent update from Dr. Sweat at the Medical University. Tracy, do you want to add anything to that?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'll do a brief update. You had Dr. Sweat earlier, who has been amazing in really guiding the city throughout the entire pandemic. He's been a tremendous partner. So I'll keep my updates brief, and then I do have a few notes just from Shannon and his team to share with you all on their work recently. So some really, as Dr. Sweat mentioned, the numbers are looking really good. Even since the last time we met, we've seen a 48% decrease in cases in that 7-day average. So we continue on that downward trend. I included the dashed black line, though, kind of to Dr. Sweat's point. You know, we're not quite out of the woods yet, simply because of the presence of the variants. And you can kind of see we've been at the stage we're at before, and have seen another surge. So we still do need to remain vigilant and for a little while longer, hopefully not too much longer. But very exciting. All of our indicators are green. And as of yesterday, the city moved back into phase 3. Hospitalizations continue to go down. This is Charleston County, so this is another good sign. And hopefully, like Dr. Sweat indicated, with getting some of our most vulnerable population vaccinated first, hopefully this will just continue to decrease. Distribution, as of yet, they haven't announced the Janssen distribution that we're going to get in South Carolina, but you can see that the Pfizer is actually up for distribution this week. So hopefully that will continue to go up, and we'll continue to get more and more Janssen as well.
You mean Johnson & Johnson, or is it?
It's the same, yeah. So it's Johnson & Johnson or Janssen. Janssen is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, thank you. I hadn't heard
Sure. Yeah, sorry. CDC calls it Janssen, so I apologize.
Okay.
And just, I think you all have seen this in Dr. Sweat's, and it sounds like at least Councilmember Shea was on the DHEC website earlier and had a sense of this. But, we've gotten 1.2 doses administered in the state, and we're getting close to 20% of the population that have at least started the vaccination process. So received that at least initial first dose. So that's very, very encouraging. I did include some demographics as well. I know this has been of interest to y'all. And this is at the state level. And actually now they've just released a new dashboard or an updated dashboard that you can dig down to the zip code level and actually see all of the demographics and number of vaccinations at that level. So a lot that you can glean from their updated dashboard. But we can see at the state level, we did see just a slight increase in the percentage of our Black population getting vaccinated. So that's good, but we still have a long ways to go with only 14% being vaccinated when it's actually 27% of the state population. So we have a little ways to go there. But other than that, not a lot has changed as far as percentages of demographics and ethnicity and gender. Brief updates from our emergency management team. So this is really exciting. These guys have been working really hard to create as much opportunity for vaccines provided in the city. So last week, Harris Teeter administered last month, administered almost 1,800 vaccinations at the Gilliard. So that's really great. And they're gonna do the second doses this coming week. And those are all gonna be second doses, so there won't be any new appointments with those. MUSC is planning to, they still have a couple of hoops to jump through, but it looks like they'll be ready to open the clinic at 180 Lockwood. So that partnership is coming to fruition. They hope to administer 1,000 vaccines a day at that location. And it's going to be open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
How far apart would you say we're seated? 20 feet?
Oh.
Councilmember Griffin, would you please mute? Thank you.
Sorry. And then, of course, the hours of operation for that are going to fluctuate based on vaccine availability, but that is what they are planning. And it will be Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that will be offered at that location. And lastly, Feder Healthcare is going to be operating a vaccine clinic out of the Arthur W. Christopher Community Center, or the gym, on Monday, March 24th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that is no appointments. So it's first come, first serve for that particular location. And then the second doses for that will be administered on April 21st. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions you all might have.
Great. Councilmember Griffin?
Yeah, Tracy, what's the time?
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Councilmember Gregory.
Yeah, I just want you to give me the time frame for the Arthur Christopher Community Center again.
Sure, that's going to be happening Monday, March 24th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tracy, do you mind going back a slide, please? It says 19% of South Carolina population, total people started vaccination, but what do you know what the percentage of the eligible individuals who are eligible for the vaccine? Because there's a lot of young people that are still not eligible. I think it's more like in the 30%, right? 33% or somewhere like that.
Yeah, DHEC was reporting it's like 33% of those that are eligible for 1A have been vaccinated.
Perfect. That's what I thought. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions for Tracy or comments? Hearing none, I'm going to next ask Susan Herdina to walk us through where we stand with our executive orders and our ordinances regarding COVID-19. Susan?
Mayor, City Council members, I know you're all looking forward to the meeting when you won't be hearing from me on these issues. So I look forward to that too, and I think we're all hopeful. What I'd like to talk to you about this evening are items I3, 4, and 5, and we'll take each of those individually. I'll go through them individually for tonight's purposes. The first one is to ask that the executive order declaring a state of emergency be continued to May 7th. And I would add that just yesterday, the governor, in an order that he issued, order number 2021-13, extended the emergency, the state of emergency in South Carolina. And in his order, which is online and anyone can look at, he does say, among other things in the whereas clause, that the COVID-19 pandemic represents an evolving public health threat and now poses different and additional emergency circumstances, which required his issuing of that extension of the declaration of emergency in the state. So the first one, item I3, is requesting the extension of the local state of emergency to May 7th. The second issue is, or item is I4, but you should have received yesterday a revised item I4. And I apologize for getting that to you yesterday afternoon, but what we were doing was trying to make that order consistent with the executive order that the governor had issued on Friday. And that was executive order 2021-12. And so what we wanted to do was give you an updated, most current ordinance that would reflect and be consistent with what the governor's order said, mandated. And so basically, if I could take a second to just go through the proposed amendment to ordinance 2021-34, and hopefully everybody received this yesterday. I know Jennifer, I think, sent it out around 4 o'clock, possibly 3:30. But what, as I said, overall, the important takeaway from this is we are aligning our emergency ordinance with the governor's order. And in that regard, there are a couple of important changes. One is we have obviously deleted the prohibition on selling alcohol after 11 p.m. in bars and restaurants. That was in our prior ordinance. That's now being deleted. We are also deleting the prohibition against amplified music. We felt that it would be inconsistent with the governor's order that lifted the prohibition on alcohol sales. So in other words, we felt that as long as the governor was lifting the prohibition on alcohol sales after 11, that tandem to that, we should also lift our prohibition on no amplified music after that period of time. So those are a couple big changes. Another big change is that in the governor's order that was issued on Friday, he lifted most restrictions and constraints on restaurant and bar operations that had to do with safety protocols. And so, for example, he took out a number of shall items that we had in our ordinance. This is in section 6 of our ordinance that I'm now talking about. So basically, he said, for example, that instead of restaurants having to post signage on their entrances requiring no visitors if they have COVID-19, now they should not post it. So there were a number of restrictions that the governor took away and just made as guidelines. We have followed that and done the same thing in our ordinance, section 6. And we also did one thing which is totally consistent with the with the governor's executive order, which is we have left in place the mask prohibitions. And what the governor has said on that is that cities, he expressly says in his orders that cities and counties can continue to impose mask restrictions if they believe that the circumstances in the community, given the new variants and new circumstances that are evolving, would warrant that imposition of the mask ordinance. So that's probably a lot to tell you, but long story short, what we're doing is we are lifting almost all of the restrictions that were in place before, with the exception of we're continuing to wear masks in public places, continuing to social distance, continuing strongly recommending not no large gatherings, and strongly encouraging people to follow the safety measures of the CDC and the state Department of Health and Environmental Control. The third item is the continuation or extension of, and let me step back. We've asked that that ordinance be extended, that emergency ordinance, the amendment to 134, stay in place for 60 days, which would take it up to May 7th, basically. The third ordinance that we're asking you to approve tonight is the emergency ordinance extending emergency ordinances that have been passed previously. This is in your packet. It's item I-5. We're asking that these particular emergency ordinances be extended to May 7th. Now, for purposes of discussion, I don't know if you all have this in front of you. Again, this is item I-5, and there are roughly six ordinances which we are asking you to extend, and they are listed in section 2 of the ordinance I-5. And I'm happy to answer any questions about those, but they're basically continuing the prohibition on consumer price gouging, continuing the suspension of the requirement of physical presence of council members at council meetings, continuing the emergency ordinance regarding temporary procedures for public hearings, continuing the emergency ordinance for allowing affordable housing units to be approved by the administrative officer, continuing the emergency ordinance on decreasing risk of exposure to COVID-19 in retail businesses. And just as a side point, that has no mandatory provisions in it. It's all guidelines for safe operations in retail businesses. The last one would be the emergency ordinance requiring parade permits for 25 or more persons. There's a seventh ordinance listed there, which is 134, which has to do with the masks in public places and restrictions on restaurants and bars. But if council is of the mind to approve the amended version of 134, that would replace 2020 134. We are asking that this ordinance also be extended for 60 days to May 7th. So that's a lot. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about those three items.
Great. Councilmember Shealy and then Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have a question, but I have a lot of thoughts and comments. And I know that compared to other areas, we've done a pretty good job of keeping our cases lower during the critical times of this pandemic. We've probably been the strictest municipality in the state. And now the groups that are most at risk in our state have had the vaccine or has had an opportunity for an appointment to take the vaccine. And that covers, I think we said, close to 1.3 million people in South Carolina, which include people over 65, our frontline medical workers, our police officers, firefighters, school teachers, those with medical conditions, frontline workers, all of these groups that were at more risk. And we are where we wanted to be. We're all green on all of our charts right now, and all indications are that we're going to continue to get better every day with every vaccination. With 3 vaccinations in place and a pleasant spring weather coming, I think the emergency order has done its job. And I think now that we've protected the most at risk and we have a plan to protect everyone now, when we put this in place, we didn't have a plan. We didn't know what was going on. But I think it's time for us to move forward. Our constituents are more educated than they were when this emergency order was put in place. The virus has changed us, and people who are concerned about the virus will continue to wear masks, whether we tell them they have to or not. They'll keep their distance. They'll wash their hands. They'll use sanitizer. I don't think we any longer have to make this a requirement. There'll be businesses who want to protect their customers and their staff, and they're going to require people to wear masks in their businesses, and they're going to keep their distances. They're going to provide the sanitation, stuff. They're going to keep things clean. So I just think now is the time to move forward, give our constituents the right to choose, and allow them to be careful on their own. And I think the emergency order has helped us get to the point we are, but I just feel like it's time for it to expire. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Griffin.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It is impossible not to get emotional or get personal when we talk about COVID-19, because every one of us has lost people that we love, and we've seen people struggle when contracting the virus. My own father was hospitalized just recently from COVID-19. Trust me when I say that I value every single life that is impacted by this deadly virus. I see where all of our colleagues have made valuable points over the past few months, and it has been the will of council to continue to vote for the emergency ordinances and wear masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But Charleston has a proven track record now that is past that point of transmission, infection, and mortality rate. It is time to move on to the next phase. Just a couple of weeks ago, I came in here and sat in the chamber for the first time. Tonight, I'm joined by our colleague, Councilmember Waring. And just as an example of common sense, we were clearly sitting 6 feet apart, and we were asked to spread out even more, which we complied. We're clearly 15 feet or more apart. He's had both of his vaccinations. I was tested for COVID just yesterday, because I want to make a commitment to all of you on council that if we do meet in person, with me being in the last phase to get the vaccine, I am willing to go get tested before every meeting to ensure to you that I will not be able to spread the virus and that I will test negative. But for some reason, we've still been asked to wear masks in this room, even though we're spread significantly farther apart. And that to me is a perfect example as to why we need to take a more common sense approach as we move forward. Because of the conditions across the state have continued to improve, our governor released some very significant executive orders in the last week, ending statewide mandates for mask wearing in bars and restaurants. And we have to remember that he was one of the governors who did not impose a mask mandate statewide, instead allowing municipalities and local governments to make those decisions. The city of Charleston, on the other hand, has always had a very restrictive, very broad ordinance. In fact, you could probably argue that we have the most restrictive mask ordinance in the entire state. This goes against the executive order from last Friday, which states that the mask ordinances of local municipalities should be narrowly tailored. Face coverings are only necessary when people can't reasonably socially distance. And finally, it mentions how data should be used to make the ordinance as least restrictive as possible. It's important that we give our citizens and visitors a very clear understanding as to what our plans or intentions are. With a 99% survival rate, this is not something the city needs to dictate any longer. We need to come up with a serious plan of action that puts the power back in our people. We also need to quit writing tickets. And frankly, I would love to see these citations dismissed. The precedent is there. Just last year, our city prosecutor dismissed several police citations that were nonviolent, especially after the riots took place on May 30th. We said at that time that we didn't want to ruin people's lives over nonviolent single instances. Well, these people that have been served with mass citations deserve the same consideration. At the end of the day, I trust every one of our constituents. And I know that many of them, even if we lift mandatory mask restrictions, are still going to wear them daily. I would also suspect that a majority of our businesses will still require masks to be worn by their employees and probably their patrons as well. I think it's time we give them the right to choose again. We have dictated their lives in a lot of ways for a year. Whether it be tonight or whether it be in the near future, it's time to show some faith in the people we represent. Do what is right for them and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Jackson, and then Brady, and then Saccharin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, council members who've already spoken. I empathize with the people who are, ready to declare that we've done all we can do as a local government, and that we should let the people be responsible and make up their own minds about how they go about their daily lives. I do resonate, though, also with the especially the people in the occupations that were moved into phase 1B beginning yesterday. And I know, I think Councilmember Shealy mentioned teachers have already had their opportunity. My daughters are teachers. Thankfully, they had a friend who heard that this phase was going to open up. I don't even know how, from some other medical person or something. And they were able to get an appointment today. But that isn't true of the majority of the phase 1B eligible people, as far as I know. They're still being challenged to find a place that will take an appointment, and they're having to wait into April. So I feel like 1B people are definitely those who serve people face to face every day in our grocery store lines, in the restaurants, in the other retail spots. And, yes, we had a majority of public comment letters that the clerk tallied for us that were asking us to drop the 60-day extension. But the two letters that were the most compelling to me were from the two frontline, I think they were mostly, restaurant bar employees. One was a manager, and I think the other one might have been too. I didn't really pay attention to their own occupation, but they both serve the restaurant industry and the customers. And they basically begged us in their two letters to continue this as a local government enforced mandate, because they said it's way too hard to argue with customers trying to, push their way into a restaurant without masks, especially if they're in a location where they're most likely to get tourists from out of town. So I feel like we should be respecting the people who are on the 1B cusp of things, and give them, a little while longer to feel safer by people continuing to get their vaccinations. I would be willing to compromise. A few of us talked about that today. If we wanted to make it, 1 month into our first meeting in April, and then revisit this decision, let's hope that the supply continues. Let's hope that we can continue to see the percentages of population. I had a couple of letters in my inbox today from people who mistakenly thought that 33% of our whole population across the state had already received both vaccines. It's 33% of people who are eligible in phase 1A, which we know opened up back in December. And it's just now that only a third of those people have actually gotten their vaccines fully completed. So the supply has been the problem. I do think that we should let that process work. I would vote to either extend it as it's been recommended to us for the next 60 days, or cut that in half and then come back and do this again in April. Thank you.
Councilmember Brady.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to take a few moments to explain why I'll be voting the way I am on the city mask mandate. As I'm sure we've all seen this week, and we've seen in this meeting, through communications left with the clerk's office, as well as emails to us individually, passion runs deep on whether the city ought to extend its mandate for another 60 days. On one side, Folks point to the fact that the governor has lifted virtually all restrictions, including his requirement for face coverings in restaurants in jurisdictions that did not have their own ordinances, or that they are tired of having to wear a mask, or that they feel their civil liberties are being violated by being required to wear a mask in the city, or that masks are ineffective against the spread of COVID-19. On the other side, folks point to the fact that masks help vulnerable people feel more secure and therefore are able to engage more fully in the economy, or that wearing a mask shows respect for others and follows the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or that masks follow the latest recommended science on stopping the spread of COVID-19. It is unfortunate that the issue of wearing a mask has become a polarizing culture war issue in the middle of a pandemic, but this is not the first time, nor probably the last, that this issue will be debated in the midst of a viral pandemic. Indeed, during the 1918 flu pandemic, masks were mandated in locales across the country, and schools and movie theaters closed and public gatherings banned. And there was opposition to these measures then, with citizens in San Francisco even forming an anti-mask league. At the time, the city of San Francisco implemented a $5 fine, which was a significant sum at the time, if they were caught in public without a mask and were charged with disturbing the peace. Even during the 1918 pandemic, there was competing information coming from government officials and health institutions, much like we see today. The Surgeon General and President Wilson at the time completely downplayed the virulence of the new flu strain that was ravaging the country amidst World War I, even while other public health officials and institutions, including Johns Hopkins University, the New York Board of Health, and the Rockefeller Institute, pleaded for more measures to be taken. But most of the implementation of public health measures was left up to the states and localities, just like today. I give all that background to say that history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. They were not able to develop a flu vaccine in time to help with the 1918 pandemic, so the pandemic ended when those infected either died or developed immunity. However, with the coronavirus pandemic, which it should be noted has killed more Americans than Americans who died in World War II, we do not have one but 3 vaccines that have been developed. There is light at the end of this tunnel, but seeing the light is not enough. We have to get to the end of the tunnel. No matter what we do here today, people will still question the efficacy of wearing a mask as a prevention against COVID-19. And it is true. The recommendations for mask wearing have changed from don't wear a mask at the beginning of the pandemic to recommendations to wear multiple masks. This is not some nefarious conspiracy on the part of career public health professionals. This is the scientific method at work. Hypotheses are designed to be tested, and when a hypothesis proves wrong, it is tweaked and tested again. Unfortunately, most of us only encounter the scientific method when it is basically settled science. That is, a hypothesis has been tested, peer-reviewed, and agreed upon. The coronavirus pandemic has made us have to watch the scientific method get applied in real time. Science has developed these vaccines, and now the state has opened up eligibility. So there is a real chance that between those who have developed antibodies to COVID and those getting the vaccine, we can reach a point here relatively soon where masks are no longer needed, but we are not quite there yet. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but I want to be absolutely certain that the light at the end of the tunnel is actually daylight and not an oncoming train. Therefore, I will be voting to extend the mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sacklin.
Thank you, Mayor. We've been discussing these emergency ordinances for the better part of a year, and I've heard from many constituents, like many of us have, and there are a few things I definitely want to address and get on the record tonight, especially in the face of some of the public comments that we received. Number one, I'm proud of you, Mayor, and I'm proud of my fellow council members for the direction that we've taken this past year when it comes to COVID. Of course, there's some things we could have done better, but we focused on science and we focused on the data. And when I took an oath to protect this city, it wasn't just buildings and streets. It's our most vulnerable, those without access to healthcare, in particular our elderly. So let's just be clear, 8 out of the 10 deaths attributed to COVID were over 65. So to suggest that this wasn't and isn't a serious health concern completely dismisses the facts. There's no playbook for dealing with a pandemic, and it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, make comments on Facebook, and second guess those in elected office. Nobody I know likes wearing a mask, and there's no conspiracy theories to hurt small businesses or take away someone's rights. This is the best part. there are laws ensuring we stop at lights, that we don't smoke indoors, that we wear seatbelts. And I don't hear anybody crying about personal freedom issues when you hear that. But mandating people to wear masks in the middle of a global world pandemic with no vaccine till 2 months ago, mind you, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Come on, come on. Those that think masks do not help clearly are not reading the overwhelming body of evidence and global research. And quite honestly, I have to ask, where are you getting your information? If you want to debate about whether Big Brother is infringing upon your rights or your right to wear a mask, that is one thing. But when someone flat out tells us in the middle of a public meeting and through email and on Facebook that masks do not help, I say with all due respect, maybe you should spend less time on Facebook and more time gathering information from the variety of sources that are available to you. Each of us is entitled to our opinion, but not our own facts. And study after study suggests that wearing masks reduces transmission rates substantially. The data is clear. And so for the good news, because I do think there is light at the end of the tunnel, and to Councilman Brady, I don't think it's a train. To all the city residents and a large majority of Americans who decided to wear a mask in public, social distance, and wash your hands in an effort to protect themselves, as well as others like grocery store employees, restaurant workers, teachers, your efforts have paid off. And if this isn't evidence that some basic behavior changes can have a major impact, I don't know what else needs to be shown. In South Carolina, infections and deaths due to COVID are decreasing. Our vaccination numbers are going up, and this is all good news. This should give us hope. And I will say to Councilman Shaley and Councilman Griffin, I think our narrative has to change. We have to move from a place of protection and inclusion and being reactive to a place of hope and tomorrow and optimism. I do think we need to have a plan to end this mask ordinance and to set a date to resume in-person council meetings. I do think the 60-day ordinance, as it's currently written, is too long. I think we should enforce or reduce that ordinance to 30 days and set a goal to meet in person for council meetings beginning Tuesday, April 27th. If at the 30-day mark, conditions on the ground change, then we adjust. We need to ensure a majority of those in 1B are vaccinated, and they have not been vaccinated. There are teachers here in Charleston County that still have not been vaccinated and will not be vaccinated for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I realize it's been a tough year and we're not out of the woods yet, but I do think we begin changing the narrative, like I said, from protect and isolate to one that's cautiously optimistic and hopeful. I think, Mayor, we all need a bit of help right now. Yes, Mayor.
So could I entertain a motion? And I hear y'all comments about the timing on this thing. Our first April meeting would be on the 13th. So frankly, it'd be a little more than 30 days. So if you want to set a motion to have a shorter time frame than the 60 days, I'd respectfully ask that you consider making it through April 14th so that we at least get to that April meeting without having to have an emergency meeting.
That's fine. Can I just finish my comments?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Excuse me.
I think once we get enough citizens vaccinated, we ought to shift our attention to rebuilding and rethinking how we support our small business owners who've been decimated. We have to acknowledge that many of these small businesses are closed and will be closed forever, and they're never coming back. And I do think this is an opportunity to rethink how we support those small business owners, in particular, our Black-owned business owners here in Charleston. And I just want to share some sobering data that I spent this week looking up and researching. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that small business ownership in the US dropped 22% between February 2020 and April 2020, but Black ownership dropped 41%. That's the greatest decline among all racial groups during the depths of the pandemic. An H&R Block survey of almost 3,000 small business owners found that 53% of Black business owners saw their revenue drop by half, compared to 37% of white owners. I would argue that when we go about restarting and rebuilding and reinvesting in our local economy here post-COVID, Mayor and council members, this is more about racial equity and opportunity than anything else in our city's recent history. Study after study suggests that small Black business owners were left out during the COVID. And if there was a wealth and opportunity gap prior to COVID, the gap is only going to get bigger post-COVID. I think this is a critical opportunity for us as a city and speaks directly to the work of our Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation. And I think it's an opportunity for us to address this, Mayor and fellow council members. That's the extent of my comments.
Thank you, sir. Can I entertain a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll make that motion that we extend this emergency ordinance, all of them as we need to until April 14th, after we've had our meeting and a vote on April 13th.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councilmember Shade, Mitchell, Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to rehash the comments that several of you have already made, but I do just want to run through some numbers and keep this in the proper perspective. And we heard from Dr. Sweat very beginning of our council meeting, 603 cases nationwide a year ago. Now we're at 29 million. 22 deaths a year ago. We're at 525, almost 526 deaths. And when you look at those numbers, you need to keep in perspective that those deaths represent 20% of the global deaths, 20% of the global deaths our country has racked up. And we only represent 5% of the global population. So 5% of the global population accounts for 20% of the deaths from this pandemic. That is a sobering number. That is a sobering number that we have to take into account. That's on a national level. On a local level, Dr. Sweat said of the Tri-County area, only 21% have been vaccinated. Statewide, only 10% and 20% have only received their first shot. I'll get my second shot on March 18th, thanks to the diligence of Kay Cross, and helping me get my appointment when I couldn't figure out how to schedule it myself. But I got it done, and I'll get my second shot on March 18th. The science on this is very clear and very specific. Social distancing, wash your hands, and wear a mask. It's just really that plain. And we are very close to having this pandemic under control, but there are two factors that we need to be aware of, and Dr. Sweat touched on this very shortly. One, there's a variant out there. And if we're not careful, that variant can spread. If we're not diligent, that variant can spread. And then I'm not sure, and I don't know if the scientists understand that variant of the current vaccine and how effective that's going to be. Second, we have seen spikes. It is well documented. Tracy pointed that out to us, and you saw the graph. There is that threat of a spike to continue. Now, if we want to continue this ordinance until after, on or about April 14th, I'm all for it, to see what our numbers are, to go back and revisit the number of people who've been vaccinated in the Tri-County area, to see where that 21% has gone up to a higher number. I think that's a smart move on our part, and also support us going into the 14th. But I'm going to vote for either version, that we continue this for 60 days or continue it until the 14th of April, either way, because we have got to remain diligent. And I think that, I'm not sure if it was Councilmember Sackett said this or Councilmember Brady said this, our number one responsibility is public safety. And we think about that as fire protection and police protection. But the well-being of our public is our job number one. It is what we do to make sure that we are protecting our citizens, and we're protecting the people who come visit our city. And this is our responsibility. It's not anything political. It is just the science out there, and it's the hard numbers are out there. So I'm gonna support either one of these versions, either the amended version that we just discussed or the way it was written. But let's all of us join in and have a unanimous vote on continuing this until at least April 14th. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Mitchell, then Appel.
Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members, I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone was saying, and with my colleague, with Peter Shade and Councilman Sacrum, Councilman Jackson. And I would have voted for the 60 days. Doesn't matter to me with the 60 days. I was going to support the 60 days. I had too many family members and too many friends that close friends that died from that virus. Very close friends that I see. And this is very seriously. We have to take this very seriously, and we have to make the tough decisions. We know people beat us up. I get beat up all the time, but it doesn't matter. I'll take it because I'm there to help, to assist the community. And that's what's all about me. It's all about community. It's nothing about me at all. It's about the community at large. And that's why we are here, to look out for the community of safetyness. They might not see and hear what we hear and see all the numbers that we are seeing and seeing what happened over the state of South Carolina, even in the city of Charleston. It's pretty bad. A lot of us had the vaccine. I've had the vaccine. I'm taking my second shot on the 18th also, and with most of the people that taking their vaccination, and we are in council meeting, most of the council members would have their vaccination. So they said if you had the vaccination, you could meet together and you wouldn't have to go through all this because you have the vaccination already. But some of us can't take it because they haven't reached the age yet or whatever the case may be. So we got to be very, very careful. If we don't keep this down right now, it could come back and the spike could come up and it can be worse than it is now. And that's what happened before. So we got to be very careful with it. And that's all I'm saying. I hear what the people are saying. I hear what the community is saying. But we are here we are really looking out for them and ourselves also. And that's all we are doing. And it's give us a little, like I asked before, Mr. Mayor, when we had the press conference, we said, give us a little time. Time might be next week, time might be next month, time might be 6 months. But this is the way it works. This is something that happened that we were prepared for, we didn't know anything about. But we want to make sure that everybody stays as healthy as we possibly can. We don't want to see any more death. I don't want to see any more death. I have grands in the schools. It's grands. My kids are growing, but I have grands in the schools. I have daughters and sons that are working out in community also. So if we don't keep this thing under hand and as safe as we possibly can, it could be more. And I don't want to see nothing happen to them also. So we have to look in a broader picture of it. And that's all we're doing, a broader picture. So if we're going to if the council member agreed to go to the April 14th, I would go to April 14th because I don't want to see it spike before we get there. And we have to go back again and close everything back down. And then everybody's going to fight more. So we've got to weather the storm a little bit. It's getting there. People are getting vaccination. It's getting there. So we've got to weather the storm a little bit. So let's be a little patient, And I know how it is, but we've got to be a little patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to be brief on this. I think a lot of great points have been made already this evening. And it's true. We've made tremendous progress as a country, as a state, and as a city in dealing with this unprecedented health challenge. One thing we need to keep in mind, this mask ordinance, this mask mandate is the last vestige of the COVID-related regulation that we've been under. There's never been a lockdown in South Carolina. There was about a month and a half between the middle of March and the first week of May where there were a lot of businesses closed, almost all of which were due to the governor's orders. Since then, things have pretty much been open. And if you were out downtown in the city of Charleston over the weekend, there were people all over the Battery, all up and down King Street, in restaurants, in bars. That's great. We're coming back, and the city of Charleston is going to come back stronger and better than ever. Wearing a mask is a small, tiny thing that we can do in the fourth quarter of this battle, as Councilman Brady said, I think he said it great, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel is not the same thing as being at the end of the tunnel. We're getting close. I thought we were probably there based upon everything that I had heard and the expedited rollout of the vaccine and the additional resources that are being put into vaccination. But I'm fortunate to have a lot of doctors in my district, and to a man and to a woman, every single doctor I spoke to over the weekend thought it would be a terrible mistake if we got rid of the mask ordinance at this time. So that's good enough for me. I agree with everybody. Our goal needs to be to get back in person meeting as soon as possible and as soon as it's safe to do so. We can do it, guys. We can absolutely do that. I agree with the idea of breaking this off into smaller pieces so we can come back and evaluate where we are. But let's also be real about this. COVID-19 is never going away. There's always going to be COVID-19. There's always going to be cases. There's always going to be people that, God forbid, die due to COVID-19. It's going to be with us forever, just like most viruses, unless we can totally eradicate it, which would really be something. We have to learn as a society how to live with COVID-19, right? And that vaccines are a big part of that, and it's going to provide an immense amount of protection for a huge number of people. But we cannot act as if the risk is ever going to go away. There are going to be people that never get vaccinated because they believe Bill Gates is going to control their mind when they get stuck with the needle. But that can't stop us from meeting in person. That can't stop society from opening up. I heard President Biden say that at the end of May, enough vaccine will be out for everybody that wants it. That's a pretty darn good line in the sand. And, Israel has been an incredible country when it comes to vaccinating its people, but not just with the rollout, the resources, all of that, the messaging in Israel, the public relations, they're very direct people in Israel. They speak directly to the point and don't meander around like some people, like myself. They're very clear. Get vaccinated, get back to normal. They're having vaccines given in bars where they say, get a shot, take a shot. The messaging is muddled in the country right now. It's get a vaccine, but still wear a mask. Get a vaccine, but hey, you shouldn't be around your kids. We need to turn the page on this thing. I think we're getting close to the end of the book. We're not there yet. I think we need to continue this mask ordinance, but guys, we need to mentally and psychologically prepare ourselves for getting back to normal in every way, shape, and form. And we tolerate risk in all measures of life. That's not to mean that we're going to be reckless or we're going to be foolhardy. But once people are vaccinated, it's a game changer, and we can't afford to stay in this COVID mentality for forever. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Waring, and then let's try to call the question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we took the oath and got sworn in after the last election, I spoke about the intellect of our council. And I can't be proud of what was prepared today and said. I mean, people doing their homework on this, and that's best for our community. I really appreciate what Councilman Brady said. You're right. That light at the end of the tunnel, let's make sure it's a light towards, I'm paraphrasing, but prosperity and not a train headed towards us. Councilman Saccharin, your words will be memorable. I mean, the impact on minority communities financially on this has been devastating. So if we make a mistake, we make a mistake on the side of being conservative with one another's health as a community. I would have voted for the 60-day. I'm certainly going to vote for the 30-day or thereabouts, whatever it is, because if we make an error, again, we make an error on trying to keep our community healthy. That said, the portion about We need to be reasonable about this, Mr. Mayor. I'm in chambers along with Councilman Griffin. I have been vaccinated. Councilman Griffin has tested positive. We are, I'm sorry, negative. That's a big word change, negative. We are at least 15 feet apart and the public isn't present. And within less than 60 minutes, we've been told twice to put on our mask. Now, hypothetically, if there were livability officers, I guess they would come in here and write us a citation. But there's no science that says a person who's been vaccinated, a person who's tested negative, that's 14, 15 feet apart, is a danger to anybody with this virus. So we have to use a measure of common sense. That said, if I were to, whenever the bell is rung and we reach herd immunity, I don't know if that's September or some other portion of this year, I will never go back. Councilman Shealy's right. Lives have changed. I will always have a mask. I don't know that I would ever go back. We used to look at some of the, and I say this respectfully, some of the people from Asian societies walking around with masks on. And you know what? Some of us used to laugh. You get on a plane, people would come in and have a mask on, and we would say to ourselves, what's wrong with them? I tell you what, moving forward, when I get on a plane, I'm gonna have a mask. And those people were right. They had more experience with pandemics than we recently have. So that said, I'm gonna support the amendment. I like the graded way of moving into it. I think it's the best that we can do. And I would hope that I was gonna do it at the end of the meeting, and I still would do it because that's the appropriate period of time to do it. But I agree with Councilman Saccharin and others that we need to show the leadership that we can govern this municipal government in person with masks, safe distancing, so the public can come and the public square return to where respectfully we can be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none, all in favor of 3, 4, and 5 as amended to be effective through April 14th, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay. Nay for 3 and 5, not number 4. Number 4 was ending the 11 o'clock curfew, correct?
It included the mask ordinance, though.
I thought that was 3 and 5.
You want to clarify that, but I'm pretty sure that 4 included the mask ordinance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, nay for all 3 then.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, so that was a nay from Councilmember Griffin and Councilmember Shealy. Anyone else? I was just curious. All right, thank you very much. So next we'll go to our council committee reports. 2 ordinances are included on this next one, our Committee on Community Development. Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, the community development meeting was held on, what's that now? I got so many of them. On February 25th at 4 p.m. I'm gonna ask Ms. Johnson when she come up to assist me with giving this information. We had on the bottom of them, you see that on the give the first meeting to the following bills, at the community development, both of those are passed and approved. And I'm gonna ask Ms. Johnson to come explain the first 3, A, B, and C.
I think Gianna is trying to connect back to the meeting. I don't know if Jennifer can admit her.
Yeah, so I'm on the phone with Gianna right now.
Well, on item A.
She got bumped off of her computer, so she is signing on right now.
Okay. Well, while she was signing on item A, we had a big discussion on that, and we had a presentation about by NHE for the low-line affordable housing development, which they received the contract. So, and it was only for information only. So Ms. Johnson gonna probably explain the B and C, if she's there yet.
She's coming online right now.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell and members of council. As Councilmember Mitchell indicated, the first presentation was for information only, allowing greater familiarity with the organization, the development group that will build the rental properties on the city's property near the Low Country Low Line. Item B was an ordinance to amend Part 15 for Chapter 54 of the Code of the City of Charleston to provide for an increased fee in lieu under our mixed-use workforce housing ordinance. The CD Committee of City Council supported that. Since that time, Assistant Corporation Counsel Chip McQueenie has provided you an ordinance to support that approval. And I am going to ask Matt Ojala to give you further explanation on the fee. I would say the ordinance and the recommendation stems from the report that was submitted to CD Committee of City Council approximately 1 month ago that basically provided evidence relative to the fact that we recognize over the last several years that the fee was lower than we desired it to be. And I think many of you heard me say that at the very beginning, but nevertheless, we have evidence showing that now. And so what we're recommending to you tonight is a change in that. Item C, of course, was an ordinance to amend Article 2 under Chapter 54 of the Code of the City of Charleston related to our conservation development. And again, Corporation Council prepared an ordinance and we have our planning director who will speak to that. But before we go there, Matt, if you will just share with the council the recommendations we made relative to the fee. And I would remind council the idea behind these recommendations and this fee structure is to provide for the opportunity for developers who opt into the fee in lieu to have several options. But our goal here is to ensure that we are able to have affordable housing constructed. The fee has been phenomenal for us because it's been an unrestricted source of funds. But in light of the need for affordable housing, we want to make sure that we can get the affordable housing on site. So with that, I will be quiet and ask Matt to just explain that fee structure. And I see.
Matt, before you begin, Councilmember Seekings, did you have a question or observation?
I did, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I just want to make sure procedurally that what I heard from Ms. Johnson is correct. So as this came through the CD committee, they got a report on the fee in lieu and some recommendations, but they did not vote on this ordinance that we have in front of us. The ordinance has come between the meeting and tonight. Is that correct?
We voted to approve the fee.
But the ordinance as drafted has not been reviewed by the committee.
Correct.
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 Although it's now getting reported out as an ordinance recommended by the committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, but I must say that substantially the ordinance, the effect of the ordinance is just to put the fee in place. Isn't that correct, Mr. McQueenie?
Yes, sir. I think the committee just voted on the fee structure. I believe the ordinance was prepared before the committee meeting. And I think a couple people had pointed out some issue, just some small changes to it that I had outlined that I can go through once we get further into it. But no, they did not have the ordinance at the meeting, though. I'm absolutely sure of that. You're correct, Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Matt, would you proceed with the explanation of the fee?
Yeah, sure. So just as a refresher, developers voluntarily can opt into the MU zoning. The zoning allows for increased density on the site. In return, the development must include 20% of the units on the site as affordable. Alternatively, the developer can pay a fee in lieu to offset the affordable units on the site. And that's currently set at $5.10 per gross square foot of the development. The developer also has a second option to offset building the affordable units on site by providing land in lieu. And just to reiterate what was shared at the Community Development Committee is that, developers are all selecting the fee in lieu alternative rather than building the affordable units on site. And that's with just one anomaly property that built the units themselves as part of a separate agreement. So this update to the ordinance provides a tiered escalating fee structure to encourage developers to include affordable units within their developments and to support inclusive communities. Under the proposal, there are 4 tiers with an escalating fee amount at each tier. As there are 4 tiers, the fee amount at each applies to a quarter of the gross square footage of the development. So the fee amount at tier 1 starts at $7.50 per gross square foot. That applies to a quarter of the gross square footage of the development. It then increases at tier 2 to $10 per gross square foot. That applies to, again, a quarter of the gross square footage of the development. At tier 3, it increases to $12.50 per gross square foot, applying to a quarter of the gross square footage of the development. And then tier 4, the fee amount is $15 per gross square foot, applying to a quarter of the gross square footage of the development. And so under the structure, the developer has the choice to build, a quarter, a half, 3/4, or all of the units that they were required to provide as part of their opting in to the MU zoning. On the other hand, they have the opportunity to pay the fee to offset those units. And then just in addition, the proposal would also add a provision that would index the fee to the consumer price index, and it would be adjusted on an annual basis in future years to ensure that the value of the fee keeps up with inflation. And I'll just add one final point, and that is that the Housing and Mobility Subcommittee of the Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation has included an increase to the fee in lieu alternative as part of their draft recommendations. So I want to point out the good work that they're doing and their thinking on this issue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
So again, I guess I would make the point that the ordinance before you substantially, the purpose is just to adjust the fee and to make it adjustable to inflation over time. And this is first reading. So I would like to entertain a motion to approve it. And if there any further scrutiny of it or recommendations, of course, we can make those when we come back for second.
Move for approval.
A
second.
Motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Gregory.
I know this is for first reading, but I did have some discussions with Ms. Johnson regarding some issues that I observed, especially with regard to first generation participants. And I think that there was an omission from the old ordinance that was not included in this. And I think that I think there have been discussion to put it back in, and also to make sure that the date is consistent with the date of ratification as opposed to the date that's currently in the draft.
All right. You got that, Mr. McQueenie?
Yeah, and I made the change. Gianna contacted me today, and I made the change that Councilmember Gregory pointed out, and I appreciate that. I completely missed that portion of it and did not move it to the location it needed to be in. I can show you the red line with that change. When I was going through it, I found a couple minor changes that I also pointed out in my red line, but however you all want to proceed is fine with me. You want me to show the change?
You can, because you've already made the changes for this vote, and just so that everybody would know it, maybe we should.
Yeah, to make sure everyone is understanding.
Yes, sir. And my red line is to what you all have in front of you that's attached to the agenda tonight. And Jennifer, can I share? Well, yeah, I should be able to share. Let's see here. I think it's this one. Okay, everybody see there's a Word document in front of you. As I was going through it, I did notice the definition of square footage was written incorrectly. It should be the difference. Difference, and I think I would put different, and I didn't put the rest of the equation in there. This just matches the language from the previous definition of gross square footage that's in the ordinance now. I mistakenly wrote the tier quarter instead of the fourth tier on page 4 in the multiplier about multiplying, about increasing the amount based on the CPI each year. Councilmember Gregory pointed out in this paragraph 2, this is again on page 4, and this is what I had omitted, and I apologize. I just completely omitted it. If a certificate of occupancy has been issued for these first generation properties, these are ones that are under not the ordinance in effect now, but the ordinance that preceded that in 2017. Then if there's a conversion, the fee per unit can be prorated to account for the number of months the unit was previously subject to rent to the workforce housing covenants. So that's not a conversion. Just if you want to pay the fee in lieu instead of continuing your rental of a workforce housing unit on the property, you can pay your prorated amount based on the total months you've already rented it out as workforce housing. So you do the calculation. It's based on the $3.40 multiplier in effect prior to 2017, and it's you pay that based on the total months you've rented it out, and I think that's a 10-year affordability period. During that time, there was this is what I call a small big mistake. The section 3 should read 54,299.5, not 2 is deleted. Pretty obvious from the context. And then the date, Gianna and I spoke about this. So our workforce housing ordinance is incentive based. And so in the past, we've adopted 2 versions. The previous changes were applicable to all properties that had not previously been zoned or for which a zoning application was not pending at the time we adopted it. This ordinance, it's drafted now so that it would apply to any zonings that would occur between February 25th, which is when the CDC committee meeting was. I would recommend, if you're going to apply the pending ordinance doctrine, to make that March 9th instead of February 25th. But it would essentially ensure that if anybody rezones now to workforce housing and this new ordinance gets adopted, that the new ordinance requirements apply, not the ones in effect now, but the ones that are to be adopted. Because you might have people rezoning their properties under the old formula over the next month or so until this is adopted in order to avoid the new formula. So that would be my recommendation, is to make it March 9th and the pending ordinance doctrine applies. But you can also just eliminate application of the pending ordinance doctrine, however you all want to do it. It's easy for me to correct or change.
Councilman Gregory, is that what you were looking for?
Yes, it's consistent.
Okay, all righty, so we can move on.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Seekings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And between first and second reading, I'd love to sit and talk with Ms. Johnson and Mr. McQueenie about these next 2 questions. One is, how did we arrive at the rates that we arrived at in the 4 different tiers, or the 4 different categories, the $7.50, $10, $12.50, and $15? That's my first question.
I'll say from my perspective, they had calculated out 2 or 3 different types. I told them they didn't go as high as possible, but I told them to go as high as possible to give you all some low hanging fruit, but they did not accept that recommendation. They went, they went at an average amount, but I think, they had run the numbers based on various scenarios and decided on these particular numbers. The idea of the tier is, of course, to encourage people to build on-site workforce housing. And as you increase the number of houses you build, once you get into that last 25%, especially, it becomes more expensive to build, to just pay the money. So it encourages people to build, even if it's not the total amount on site, a smaller percentage on site. Other than that, the specifics I would have to defer to Gianna.
So that's good for now. So that I get that. And there's a follow-up question, Mr. Mayor, if I might. So the idea is to build on-site workforce housing, which we weren't successful with in the first time around. It was all fee in lieu, right? So my question is, and I wonder if we can build this in, and Mr. Chairman, I would ask that you take this up at the CD meeting on Thursday. Wouldn't it be of some value to take a look at this document and this ordinance and build a hybrid in there? The way I read this, and it's pretty complicated, and I have to say I looked at it for the first time today, is that you've got to choose before CO whether or not you're going to pay the fee or you're going to go whatever tier all in. Why wouldn't we offer a hybrid like you just described in the first generation, where someone might not be in the workforce housing business, but might like to give it a shot, and they go and they start doing it. And then maybe afterwards they decide somewhere 5 years down the road, they want to pay the fee, but we would have workforce housing online quicker than we would if the fee in lieu. It just seems that we're making them make a hard choice on the front end. We're either going to get in the workforce housing business or we're not. And I would say that there's a possibility in this ordinance to put a hybrid in there that may be of some attraction to developers going forward. And it's something I think, I don't want to commit to too much tonight in a big city council meeting, but I'd like to talk about that and see if that's something that we can build in as another third option, hybrid option.
We can take a look at it, but most of the developers I spoke with, and which most of the developers are in the district I represent, and I was explaining to them that this was going to happen. And most of them called me back and said they don't have a problem with it. So we can still discuss that at the next meeting. I have a meeting coming up probably tomorrow. Thursday, and then I have another one on the 21st. So I have 2 of them this month. So we can discuss it and we can take a look at it and see what's
Thank you.
If they change it.
All right. Councilmember Shade.
So, Gianna, this may be a question for you. How is this ordinance, as we're going through these amendments, how does this sort of compare, if we can do a comparison with other cities who are trying to do the same thing? I mean, there's obviously some tweaking we need to do with this because the first way wasn't working as well as we wanted it to work. So are these numbers that we're throwing out enough of an incentive to accomplish the goal that we're trying to accomplish with these developers and builders?
Councilmember Shahid, I think so. When we started this back in 2017, and we presented the current fee structure, many of the developers at that time told us that that fee structure was too high, that it would have an adverse effect on development in the city of Charleston, and many developers would not want to opt in to the mixed-use workforce housing. Well, that was not true. And one of the things that Councilmember White, when he served on council, said, the evidence will be whether or not they use this or not, Gianna, whether they decide they're going to opt in. Well, based on that report that we had in your council packets at the last meeting, every single developer, 13 out of the 14 developers chose the fee versus building the units on site. So that said to us that, in fact, that fee was not as punitive as they, I wanted to say cried about, but it wasn't as punitive as they made it out to be. And so with that, over the last several years, very similar to what we did at the beginning of the process, we began to analyze what other cities across the country have been doing in relation to this. Some have fees higher than what we're proposing. Some have various hybrids of fees along with other incentives included with their ordinances. And we landed somewhat in the middle, recognizing that because our fees were lower than what we wanted them to be from the very beginning, we thought it appropriate to use this scale that we're presenting to you tonight, and having analyzed and assessed the various fees across the country. So to answer your question even more specifically, will it give us the increased funding? Yes, it would give us more funding. But in addition to that, we're hoping that it will also encourage the development of affordable housing. I always refer to MU2 as the two-edged sword, simply because we knew we needed funding to reach a larger audience or spectrum of affordable housing, but we needed the units as well. And so we're hoping that what we've presented is going to do just that. Even if they don't choose to build all, they can build some and then pay the fees. So we are still garnering the unrestricted dollars, but more importantly, and equally as important, we're also getting those units, which is very important to our community at this point.
And I remember those discussions back in 2017, and my head was spinning with the tennis ball going back and forth over that net as to the, it's going to be restrictive, it's not restrictive enough. And so I think the point that you just made helps me a little bit better clarify that even if they do opt out, we get some money, and the money goes into our kitty, and the kitty helps us develop affordable housing. So it's not a lose situation. I mean, we may prefer that they include that in their development, a certain percentage of units, but we're not losing out if they don't, which may be by some debate, according to some folks, they much rather have the money into the kitty because those houses become permanent for workforce housing. So there's a lot of discussion about it, and I know it sounds like y'all trying to hit a compromise, a sweet spot is what it sounds like to me, on finding that number, that balance we're getting into. So,
exactly.
So thanks for addressing that. I appreciate your response.
Thank you. Councilmember Rappel, then Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I applaud all the work that went into this, and I think it's a very creative approach to addressing our affordable housing crisis that we all recognize that we have. I mean, part of me wants to maybe reconsider between now and second and third reading, what if we just make them build the units? I mean, I think that hard inclusionary zoning, which I would define as a base zoning designation that requires the building of affordable housing, has genuine legal issues and is a debatable issue. But here we're talking about nobody's forced to have mixed use workforce housing. This is something that is elected by rezoning, right? So the developer is coming forward saying, we want density, we want this parking relief. Well, as a city, and listen, we've got great lawyers that we'll talk about this with to make sure it's kosher, but I don't see any reason why we can't just make it a hard requirement that they put in the housing. And because what I worry about with these fees is the marketplace is very complicated. It involves a lot of complex factors that have to be dialed to the perfect tunage to have its prescribed results, or else we have the results we don't want, which we've seen for the last 3 years. Nobody's availing themselves of the stated goal here, which is to build the actual housing. And when we increase costs on development, guess what happens to the price of housing? It goes up, or you can disincentivize certain types of development from even happening. Berkeley County had a transportation impact fee for about a decade, and it killed commercial development in huge swaths of the county. So if you're ever driving through Berkeley County through the oceans of suburbia without a gas station and a fast food restaurant, it's because they had a fee structure in place that distorted the market and produced unintended consequences. I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen here, but if we want to make sure the housing is there, why not just require it?
Well, thank you. And before I go to Councilmember Jackson, just to address that, we had a lot of discussion about the permanency of affordability. And so, when you opt in with the mixed use zoning, there was a time limit that burns off on that affordability. So the thought was, if we got the fee in lieu, we could invest in properties that would be perpetual. And so that's the balance we were trying to meet. this gets us, I think, in a more reasonable spot because it in a way provides an incentive for the developer to at least produce some of the units on site and increases our fees so that if we are investing in permanent affordable housing, we get a little more fee for it. So we're just kind of trying to find that sweet spot. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would have said the same thing in response to Councilmember Appel. I think if we're gonna go the only build units route, then we need to make the affordability period much longer. And I do think that probably will, have consequences in the development community. So I'm in support of this. I appreciate the opportunity to look at the hybrid approach as Councilmember Seekings was suggesting. I haven't seen that really work. I don't know if we've had any developments even consider that, but it would be an interesting element. I at the very beginning, Michelle Johnson, when you were talking about what we have now, and I just wanted to clear up. I know that when you say unrestricted funds are in the fee in lieu, you mean for the housing budget and for the way that we can leverage money that comes over the transom, especially. I mean, essentially, we can't budget it. We can't plan for the money because developments come in and they make their decisions and then we take delivery of the funds. But you did use the word unrestricted, and I want to make it clear to everybody who's watching this that it's not a general fund unrestriction. Any money that comes in from the fee in lieu is only used for housing.
Yes,
So
that's correct.
we all know that, but I just want to make sure that no one's misunderstanding.
Thank you.
Because
and typically we're dealing with federal funds only when we're developing and preserving housing. So I tend to think in that mindset. So
right. I know, I've been there, I've done that. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I'll look forward to having another good conversation on CD committee. I would recommend that we not do it on Thursday. I think we should give our staff some time to, look into the hybrid approach, maybe have a conversation with Councilmember Seekings, but we are going to have a regular scheduled CD before the end of the month. So I think that's a good time to do that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chip, did you have another clarification for us? You're good?
No, sir. Councilmember Rappel made it, which is that it's voluntary. We're not forcing anybody into these zoning districts.
No. Correct. Exactly. We're not forcing anybody to pay a fee. They can provide all the units required, and they don't owe us a penny. So sometimes there was such a focus on the fee, folks were forgetting. Well, that's voluntary. You don't have to pay the fee. You could just provide the units as specified. All right. Any further discussion?
No, if we can't do it at the next meeting, we have another meeting that's going to be on the 25th of this month. So I have 2 meetings this month. So with Councilman Seekings is relating to, if we can't, with discussion haven't been gotten yet, if we haven't gotten the information yet, if we can't bring it up on Thursday, we can do it on the 25th.
Correct.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, the motion is to approve item B as amended.
As amended with the red line changes that Mr. McQueen showed us. Yes, yes, ma'am. All right. Any further questions, comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. Next is the ordinance regarding conservation. Maybe we'll call Mr. Morgan to present that.
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion to approve and a second. For Mr. Morgan, is there any questions about this for first reading, or would y'all like to hear Mr. Morgan's description of this?
I think it's fine.
I think it's fine. All right. Any comments then or questions regarding the proposed conservation development ordinance? All in favor?
Mr. Mayor, wait,
Yes.
I don't have any comments about the the content. But I was just hoping maybe we could review what the process will be. This goes to the Planning Commission. Assuming we give it first reading tonight, it goes to the Planning Commission next week for their recommendation to the council. And then when will it come back to the council for public hearing, do we expect?
Mr. Morgan.
The normal process, since it's going to planning commission next week, the normal process would have it come back to council at your second meeting in April, which I believe is the, I have my calendar in front of me.
27th.
The 27th. And that would be the public hearing and second and third reading.
Right, thank you.
Okay. But the pending doctrine would apply on this one as well. So somebody could come forward with a application.
No, sir. A pending ordinance doctrine only only applies to things that limit development. So you stop a run to the zoning administrator to get applications in that would violate the new ordinance that's intended to protect the public safety, et cetera. So you can only apply it. You have to do the 2 readings and hearings in order to add rights. In order to take away rights, you can apply the pending ordinance doctrine.
Gotcha. Thanks for that clarification.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. I think that's it for community development. Councilmember Mitchell, did you have anything else to add?
No, because we are giving first reading for the last 2 ordinances that we have on there also.
Great. Terrific.
That's the one. Yeah, part 15 and Article 2, land acquisition.
Yeah, that's what we just voted on.
Yeah, so it's all done.
Yes, that included the first reading of those ordinances.
Yeah.
Great.
That's all done.
We're good. All right. Next is our Committee on Traffic and Transportation. Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Committee on Traffic and Transportation met yesterday at 2 o'clock. Seems like a little longer ago now. We took up the same thing that both the Real Estate Committee and the Ways and Means Committee took up on the agreement with Palmetto Railroads and the SPA for the purchase of property and for other improvements to be made in the area where the southern loop of the railroad tracks are going to come out of the Navy base and Leatherman Terminal. Our vote was to authorize the mayor to enter into the MOA. It was unanimous. I think we've already done that through real estate and through the Ways and Means. But I would encourage you all, if you haven't actually seen a plat or a map of what the southern loop is and what it entails, I would encourage you all to take a look at it. It's going to bring some pretty long trains through the city of Charleston, particularly across Meeting Street. We had a study done a couple of years ago by Jennifer Beal, who predicted at rush hour the backups at the crossings that are at grade would be between 5,000 and 6,000 feet. And I don't think that her study, which I went back and looked at today, took into account the actual length of the trains that are going to come out of the Navy base and go across the southern loop. The longest trains that they predict that will come out of there with containers on them is 15,000 feet, which is a 3-mile long train at a speed of somewhere between 7 and 10 miles an hour. So just, we're going to have to think about that neck area and the southern loop and how we manage it. The good news is the loop did move to the east a little bit, so it does not block King Street extension, but it will come across Meeting Street. So I do think that we as a city probably ought to think about infrastructure in that area going forward. It's going to be expensive to fly over it, but it may be something we're going to want to consider, because a 15,000 foot train at 7 to 10 miles an hour during rush hour, it will ultimately be, again, a very busy and vibrant peninsula and city, will create some issues for us here in the city. So anyway, we did agree to authorize the mayor to enter into that MOA, and we hope that that monies will be used, among other things, to think about what we're going to do in that area in the future when it comes to mobility and transit with 15,000 foot trains rolling through our city. So with that, that completes my report, Mr. Mayor, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Councilmember Seekings? Councilmember Griffin.
No, sir. I just want to say that you're absolutely right, Councilmember Seekings. I actually drive down King Street Extension to get downtown to City Hall just today. And luckily, I was able to avoid that train, but it was parked on Meeting Street. And there was a line of cars backed up for miles. But I tell you what, I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Jeff McWater and the team over there at Palmetto Railways. We're very lucky that we have one of the best short lines in this country, right here in Charleston, that serves both CSX and Norfolk Southern. And just in case you're wondering, those rail cars are full of BMWs. So they're coming in and out of there all day long. And they're coming down from Greenville, and we need that commerce. We need the port. We need Palmetto Railways. They're building a brand new intermodal facility across the street from my work up on the Navy base. And we're going to have a very fluid motion of cars back and forth from the Navy base down to Columbus Street. So yes, it's going to stink a little bit with the traffic, but just know it's a lot of commerce coming through there, and it's going to create a lot of revenue for all of us. So it's very good for a very, very huge economic driver for our region.
Thank you, Councilmember Griffin. Anyone else? All right, hearing none. Next, we go to our Committee on Public Works. Councilmember Waring.
Thank you. Thank you. On your agenda, you see item I and item B. Please pay attention to item I, in that it is a change order that results in a zero cost to the city. That's one of the first times I've ever seen that in 10 years, almost 10 years on council. And that didn't happen by accident. It happened because of Mr. Fountain and his team, burning the midnight oil, trying to get the best bang for our buck. So, and the contractor, Conti, that's the contractor that's working on right now, the largest drainage project in the history of the city, the Spring Fishburne drainage project. So kudos to Conti, as well as Mr. Fountain and his team. That passed unanimous, as you can imagine. And so did item B, the letter of interest regarding the feasibility study for flooding in the city of Charleston.
Second.
Any discussion on those items? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Items A2 and A3, small projects allocation, as well as projects updates. I'm going to ask the privilege from the members of the committee yesterday who had the opportunity to ask their questions. Hopefully you keep our questions in abeyance to allow the council members who are not on the committee to ask their pertinent questions, just for the sake of time. Mr. Fountain, can you give us a review of the small projects as well as the project updates? Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Waring. So the small project updates, we did provide both a summary spreadsheet to all the members of council as well as members of the committee at the end of last week. And then we also provided write-ups, kind of short narrative write-ups with a brief description and budget and council district for each of those projects. The committee, we presented those. We discussed that these are the projects that we are currently aware of that have been requested either by council members or developed by staff over the past year. We did. I can pull those up if you'd like. Do that really quickly.
Yes, please.
So this was sort of the working list that we were aware of. Again, for this consideration in the 2021 funding cycle for the $1 million annual small project allocation out of the Stormwater Utility Fund. We did discuss these projects at the committee. The projects highlighted in yellow, just to give a little bit of background explanation, are projects that are sort of more traditionally drainage fund appropriate projects due to the scale and cost of the project. If you remove the yellow projects from the small project allocation and say those would be considered under the drainage fund, which is one of the things we discussed at committee, you would remain or end up with a remaining amount of about $1.4 million in the more traditional small project approach projects, if you included everything that had been potentially fundable in this list, of course. The kind of the direction from the committee at this point was to take a look at that $1.4 million worth of project work and see if it could be phased on a cash flow basis to see if basically we could start on $1 million of that work this year and basically have $400,000 of that work occur next year, more based on the project permitting and schedule timeframe rather than based on kind of a more traditional prioritization of which of the projects we want to fund and which ones we don't. So that's committee had asked us to come back in 2 weeks with that for the next committee meeting with that approach. So we'll be going back at a staff level and trying to see if some of these make sense from a cash flow perspective. Some of them are a little bit longer in a permitting sense, and some of them are sort of shovel ready and able to start within potentially a few weeks, depending on procurement. So that's kind of where we stand at this point. Again, the discussion of council had also asked if anyone is aware of any other projects, any additional projects that are not on the list. Certainly do let us know prior to that next Public Works Utilities Committee meeting, hopefully at least a few days in advance of the meeting, and I will incorporate them into the list for discussion at the next Public Works Utilities Committee meeting. The yellow projects then we have discussed would be eligible for discussion in the drainage fund allocation, as we previously presented with Ms. Wharton at the last Public Works Utilities meeting and the council meeting, sort of the status of the drainage fund, what we're looking at for potential cash flow unallocated to existing projects within the next 5 years. I believe we have a budget ad hoc and a Public Works Utilities collaborative project meeting scheduled to discuss TIF funds and some other project approaches. So we'll have to determine again what pathway we want to take towards allocating those drainage funds potentially into additional projects.
Mr. You would allow, I'm going to reiterate what Mr. Fountain just said. Please think about the small projects in your districts. This is going to be brought back in 2 weeks. You know some of the projects certainly better than I. Mr. Fountain knows them all, basically. But this is your opportunity to kind of say, hey, we got this pertinent thing that's been left off the list. So please kind of study it and then get with Mr. Fountain. So 2 weeks from now, we can consider it. Thank you, Mr. Fountain. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Councilmember Saccharin has a question, if you don't mind. Yep.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, because I can't see everybody, so I appreciate
Yeah.
Thank you.
So do I, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind.
Councilmember Saccharin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Matt, the Shelley Road project, is that empty lot that the city purchased, or one that you and I have been chatting about with constituents?
Yeah, so the all the ones marked as retrofit, including the Shelley Road property, those are all properties that the city had purchased due to repetitive flood damage that are currently sitting vacant. So yes, this would be the funding to basically do a landscaping design, and then also the contract work to be able to come in, kind of regrade the property to hold water more efficiently, landscape it, and potentially put in some benches or tables, and have a little bit of citizen outreach to discuss kind of neighborhood priorities for the parcel as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Fountain, do we have a 2021 small project allocation currently? I mean, is there monies available for small projects? And if there is, how much is it?
Right. So that's what I tried to lead off with. And I probably said a lot of things very quickly. Councilman
If I missed it, I apologize.
No, but I threw a lot of numbers out there very, very rapidly. But we did yet again this year allocate $1 million out of the utility fund towards small project. So we did continue the same funding level as the previous year.
And just a quick follow-up, I see that the highlighted projects are ones that could possibly be shifted over to the stormwater fund. That would then put them in a whole different category with other larger projects for funding, right?
Correct.
Which I look at the one project that I think is of interest to me because it's in my district, but I think it's probably of interest to most council members because it's a corner of Broad and Lockwood that floods every day and shuts the peninsula down. Shifting that one relatively small project over to the larger stormwater fund projects may bury it. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how you want us to report back to you on whether we think shifting it is a good idea, even though it's eligible, but I think we ought to think about that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Councilman Seekings, your due diligence on that and vigilance, frankly, raises that issue. I hope you stay engaged on that one because you're right.
I will.
That's important to all of us, so it won't be up under the rug.
Well, if I might be heard at the next Public Works Committee, I would appreciate it.
Believe me, I hear you loud and clear. I'll carry.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Fountain?
All right.
If there aren't any additional questions on this one, I will move over to the project updates.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So this is the sort of the first meeting of the month where we go through a sort of a very brief update of most of the major capital projects and some of the smaller project allocation projects that we're working through. The projects, I'll try to do this relatively quickly, but as Councilman Waring says, there is a lot going on, and they are large, important projects at the moment. So the Spring Fishburne Phase 4 project, we have now completed excavation in the outfall and wet well. Don't say those together. That's almost 46,000 tons of material that have been removed from between the two bridges there. We have installed the contractors installed the rock foundation. We've installed 80% of the H piles into the outfall. We've completed all of the pipe pile installation within the wet well. And we did perform the first major concrete pour on the project, which was a component of the base slab within the large wet well. Just for perspective on this project, the first pour we did on this project was 480 cubic yards of concrete into a 4-foot thick slab that forms the foundation, a portion of the foundation within the wet well. So it's a massive scale project. It's actually a picture of the initial pour behind me, but it was a successful pour. Contractor did a great job, and we're continuing to make really good production on that project work. The low battery phase 1 is now open to the public. The last brackets arrived from Texas for the handrails after the snowstorm there, and were able to be installed. We are still preparing to install the street lighting. That'll low battery phase 2. We've now moved the majority of the barricades and traffic control. We've done some rework of the traffic control from some initial issues we had with signage. It's always complicated when you have only one lane open going one direction, what was previously a two-way street. I think we're making improvements on that. We did also complete micropal foundation tests for the project, which is basically where we install test foundations and see if they perform with site soils the way that the designers had anticipated for the project. These came out really well, which is a good sign for the project work. That lets us proceed into CWS water line installation, which will begin this week. And then we will move behind that water line with our contractor installing foundation kind of linearly along that wall pathway. I will also be adding a story map, and we've redone the website for the project. As kind of the end of phase 1, we'll sort of show some history of the project and then give some more information about phase 2. And it's going to be a really nice, kind of really nice graphical story map. So it's a great thing to take a look at if you have a chance. The King UG project phase 1, we've now awarded that project through council. We've been working for the last couple of weeks on some value engineering approaches with the contractor, basically looking to modify some of the traffic control plans. And one of the kind of combinations of CWS water line with DOT encroachment permitting standards to basically be able to potentially save some significant money on the project. We should be coming back to present that to DOT, see if we can get concurrence from DOT. And then we'll be doing a series of outreach, certainly with the council members whose districts are potentially located within that kind of traffic impact area, and then doing a significant amount of outreach after that to the neighborhood again about those upcoming traffic impacts. With the proposal we're taking right now is the only traffic impacts would really be at night, which we think is optimal with the schools that are in that area. And we're hoping DOT will be supportive of that, but we'll certainly keep you informed as we keep moving through that approach. The King UG phase 2, we're continuing with design and permitting, and that update will continue to be the same for quite some time moving forward as we work through that relatively complex part of the pump station and permitting associated with it. The Forest Acres project utility relocation is continuing. AT&T, in this camp at our meeting with a little bit of discussion, AT&T has basically relocated the new conduit underground along Playground Road. The next step is for them to basically go in and reconnect the somewhere around 100,000 wire pairs from the old conduit into the new conduit so that we can then cut and remove the old conduit and begin our project work. We should have our final few real estate easement acquisition packages coming through the real estate committee over the next month or so. Basically, again, trying to combine what were previously phase 2A and 2B into a single phase 2 of the project to be able to start our construction as soon as AT&T is complete and moves out of the way, which we're expecting for basically the end of 2021. The Market Street drainage project, we're working on coordinating with Dominion. Again, the permits are all in place for this project. At this point, it's trying to coordinate the undergrounding of the power on the street. We do have a path forward we think would work with Dominion basically coming in, following our work on the project, doing their undergrounding, and then we'd come back basically and re-streetscape any damages they make to the corridor during their project work. So that might be a good pathway forward. We do need to review, as Ms. Horton had presented at the last meeting, the kind of updated accommodations hospitality funding for the streetscaping portion of the project. But we do think we have at least a pathway forward with the utilities. That coordination is still likely to take some time to finalize those agreements, but we'll basically continue to make progress on that project. The Cooper Jackson drainage improvement evaluation, we've completed our field survey. As we've talked about, we've cleaned about 10,000 linear feet of pipe in the area. We do have our contractor doing one last final section of cleaning, which we think will leverage a lot of the existing cleaning we've done in that area and be able to actually give kind of a whole nother level of drainage improvement in the short run to the basin. Again, that's certainly not going to fix the flooding in the area, but it should help it drain out much better at low tide and create some real improvements. Separate from that, of course, AECOM as they've completed their survey, they're now building their stormwater model, their computer model. We're gathering some information from the community on kind of known flooding and hotspots for calibration of the model or validation of the model. We'll basically build up some improvement ideas and then be able to reach back out to the community and see about prioritization of project approaches for the area. The Barbary Woods Drainage Diversion Project, we've basically been working through our preliminary design work. We've actually developed now our concept plan, about 30% plan for the area. We have a really good idea of what we want to build project-wise and how that'll work from a scale perspective. We're putting together the property acquisition plan based on that. We'll be coming back to Public Works and Utilities Committee over the next month to discuss that in more detail so we can move forward with some more detailed appraisals and potential kind of groundwork for acquisition in that project area. The Johns Island Drainage System Evaluation Project, we had our first technical advisor group meeting, and we're continuing to work through analyzing data on the island to again lay out existing drainage pathways that need both preservation and restoration as development continues on the island. The Windermere Drainage Improvement Evaluation, this one had a pretty interesting update. We actually finished a collaborative cleaning project with SCDOT where we had there's a series of old drainage pipes along kind of that intersection of Folly Road, Wesley Drive, and Folly Boulevard, where they all come together. And when the intersection was kind of redone and widened, a lot of the old drainage infrastructure sort of left in the middle of the road. So we basically had DOT come in and shut down a large portion of the intersection and roadway in that area so that our contractor and our city trucks could go through and factor out and clean all of the drainage pipes through the area. So that should provide some short-term, again, drainage improvements in the area, and it'll allow our engineering firm to come in and do a more detailed investigation of the condition of those pipes and how they all interconnect, which is sort of a missing piece of records in the area for taking back to finalize their computer modeling for the improvement recommendations within that basin as well. So it's a good example of a couple of entities working well together to kind of leverage each other's resources. The DuPont Wapu improvement projects. This is the projects 1 through 4. We're continuing with the detailed field survey work on the final design to put together construction drawings for areas 1 through 4. The Concord Street Pump Station upfit. So the design evaluation is now at about 60% on that concept report. We now have a pretty good path forward with how we're looking to upfit that station and kind of bring it back to full functionality. We've come up with a plan in the short run to potentially replace one of the dewatering pumps as well. So we have 2 dewatering pumps that are having some reliability issues. That'll give us some more consistent reliability currently and allow us to basically optimize our eventual replacement of the rest of the pump system as part of this upfit. The Church Creek flood storage projects, we're working through our preliminary engineering work. We've developed a series of concept drawings for the townhome complex, as well as some of the other property acquisitions we're considering in the area. We're trying to basically bring those up to a slightly more complete level so we can start our community outreach program and again, gathering some priorities for residents, what they'd like to see in some of those project approaches in the area. The Limehouse Brick Arch Rehabilitation Pellet Project. We've been basically starting our cleaning from Trad Street going north. We've completed about 300 feet of cleaning already and restoration on that project. That's actually been going very well. We're going to finish up this existing roughly 400-foot section. That'll kind of complete the first micro phase of that restoration project, other than what we've already cleaned to the south of Trad. It'll allow us to start setting up then design work for the next section, and we'll keep moving north phase by phase. The Medical District Tunnel Extension, Earhart project, the state is reviewing the recommendation, or the minor changes that our legal had recommended within the easement documents. We're expecting to get that back quickly so that hopefully MUSC's board can then sign off and approve on the final easements, and that will take care of basically all of the preparatory work on the project and let us move into basically into a bid phase for the project potentially, rather than a preparatory phase.
Mr. Fountain, can I add an update on this one?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to let council know, if you hadn't heard yet, I got a call from Governor McMaster about 11 o'clock this morning, letting me know that we had been approved our grant application to the CDBG mitigation funds that the state received. In fact, our application was ranked #1 of those that were reviewed. And he announced to me that we will be receiving 9.9, almost $10 million, so that we can complete the Earhart Tunnel extension, which will serve about 35 acres of the hospital district. And it's wonderful news. And, you know, I had taken Governor McMaster down in the tunnel a couple of years ago, and I was kind of kidding him at the time that I wasn't going to let him out of the tunnel unless he promised us the funding that we needed. But he really saw the common sense of what we were proposing and how much, how practical it was and how important it was to the hospital district and to the medical university. So I'm just thrilled that he followed through on that commitment. And well, he put it in the state budget last year, but with COVID, it didn't end up happening. So this was his second best opportunity to make it happen, and he did. So thank you, Governor McMaster. When y'all see him, please pass your thanks to him. It's really was a great announcement today for that project. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah. Was that the last one, or you had?
there's still a couple more. The Mueller Drive drainage easement, just very briefly, we're working to modify the ditch to improve flow to the northwest on that project. We're also contracting to clean the pipe system that flows to the north after the ditch sort of ends into the public right of way. We think that'll provide some additional relief to drainage in the area. The Culpeper Southgate drainage project that we have a surveyor under contract, and they've been working on surveying their way through that set of properties. The Dowden Street, Dowden Court drainage area evaluation. We finished our initial modeling work and the surveying that went into that with our consulting firm. We actually did come up with a really elegant set of draft recommendations that basically involve some major rehabilitation work to improve hydraulics in the area primarily. That looks like we could avoid turning that into a major capital project. There were some concerns originally that would end up being a multi-million-dollar capital project as well, due to some of the constraints of working between Old Town Road and that shopping center. But the engineer kind of came up with a really creative approach, and we think we can make some really substantial drainage improvements out there for a relatively straightforward amount of money, more like $100,000 rather than multiple millions of dollars. So
It'd make a lot of my constituents very, very, very happy, Matt. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, and that was one of the small project allocations, of course, from the previous fiscal year. That some of these fall under. The other side, West Pawnee Place Bamboo area drainage evaluation, that modeling work is also complete. The survey modeling work. We do need to reach back out with the residents in that area to truth some of our modeling. We did develop a larger scale improvement that we think will make a regional benefit based on what we found within that project, but that will be a slightly larger scale, capital scale projects that'll get put into a drainage fund consideration for that approach. And then finally, the Broad Lockwood project, which Councilman Seekins had brought up briefly earlier, the kind of the collaboration we're doing with Gulfstream and the Beach Company, where they are taking sort of the short-term improvement approach to the intersection. They have installed their piping at this point, their curbing. They've been working to install their asphalt, kind of dodging weather events. With this nice run of weather, we should have that. They should have that finished up, I think, relatively soon. And we will see, I think from the work they're doing, I think we will see some significant improvements in the short term. I think there's still a lot of value in the knee wall approach that is the city project for preventing those larger tidal events from kind of having so much water come through the neighborhoods and through that system. But this will help the area drain out much quicker after larger events, after rainfall events, and it will prevent some of these smaller tidal events from impacting the system, which does reduce flood frequency, which is still a pretty strong benefit for the area. That is the end of my report, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to certainly recognize your tenacity and consistency in staying in with the governor and getting that approximately $10 million. I want to give attention to Dr. Cole and his team over at Medical University, and certainly thank the governor and his team for his commitment to the city of Charleston. That's the extent of my report, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you. And it was a true team effort. Matt Fountain, Mark Wilbert, Sarah Fischera, our grant writer, was very active in writing up that proposal. So once again, a real team effort along with the Medical University, and I'm just real pleased we got that news today. Thanks again.
Yes,
all right. Next is our Committee on Public Safety. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The Public Safety Committee met this afternoon. Several items on our agenda. The first item was approval to submit a letter of intent to participate in the 30 by 30 pledge. This is a pledge that addresses a low cost or no cost actions for police departments to improve the representation of women in all ranks of a police department. So it's not only recruitment, making sure that they are promoted properly and adequately, they represent our community, and that we promote their success in that department. So that passed unanimously. The second item of business was a law enforcement assistance support agreement with York County Sheriff's Department, a rather detailed document addressing the rights and responsibilities between the Sheriff's Department of York County and the Charleston Police Department. But mainly this is to address the issues of child exploitation. They will use their resources and personnel to work in collaboration with our local law enforcement to address issues that occur with, and this could be anything from social media to other forms of how children are exploited in our community. The other item, and that passed unanimously as well. The other item was a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to participate in the National Ballistics Information. So as you may know, that when a shell is discharged by a firearm, pistol, revolver, even a long gun, it has certain markings on it when it is discharged. So when it is recovered, they can match that spent shell and casing sometimes with the gun that was used in a particular crime. It could be a shooting, a burglary, a murder, whatever. But if the gun is being used, this goes into the National Ballistics Information Network, so that as these guns sometimes have a tendency of doing traveling around the country, it could come back and be linked to crimes in our community, or the gun can be located in our community. So that passed as well. We would recommend items 3, 4, and 5 be approved by this council. Item number 6 is the real good news. We are a whisper away from occupying and getting a certificate of occupancy for fire station number 11. As you know, we have been dragging through this station for well beyond the deadline when this place would, this facility should have been completed. But hopefully, after we get the certificate of occupancy, Chief Courier and his team will need some time to set up shop, so to speak, in there. And hopefully that everything is good and done by early summer. Councilmember Seekings had a suggestion that we hold one of our public safety meetings there. Maybe we'll hold one of our full council meetings in the Bay Area of that station. It is a beautiful, magnificent station, and something we'll all be proud of. And a lot of folks had a hand in this, and Beth and Jason and other folks who were persistent in making sure we got to this point. So my hat's off to them and appreciate their persistence in making sure that happens. And I see Chief Reynolds is on the line, and I told your team, Chief, that we go off a little competition with the new forensic lab, because Councilmember wants to have, Kevin Shealy wants to have a meeting in the new forensic lab. We will see who treats us better, either the fire department or the police department, on their hospitality if we meet in one of those two facilities.
Both a big blessing, both of them.
They are. So Chief, there's anything that I ran over real quick that on these MOUs with the York County, the 30 by 30 or the ETF that I've overlooked?
Yeah, I think you covered it adequately. Thank you.
And I think Chief Courier is still with us. And Chief Courier, I don't know if you had anything else to add to this report.
No, I think you've covered it. Thank you.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us, and appreciate always y'all's leadership to our police and fire department. Mayor, that's my report. I move 3, 4, and 5 for approval.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next, our Committee on Ways and Means.
Move for approval.
Move
for approval. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next, we have bills up for second reading. We have 7 items. Number 7 is the matter of the Code of Conduct that I think there's some amendments to. So could I entertain a motion? We take 1 through 6 together?
Approval 1 through 6.
Second.
Any discussion on any of those items, 1 through 6? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the ayes have it. Now for third reading and ratification.
I'll move.
1 through 6. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, the ayes have it. And now we have item number 7. Maybe Mr. McQueenie would come back on and explain to us the suggestions he got from a number of council members since our last meeting and kind of where we are now with it.
Yes, sir. And my 6-year-old daughter is still awake, so I apologize. If you hear any cussing or fussing, she gets it from her mother, as most of you probably could guess. Usually Mr. Fountain's stormwater report puts her right out, but she made it this time. All right, I see that he's still online. Sorry, Matt. Okay, I'm going to do my share screen. Matt usually gives back to me as much as I give him, and more. So the amendments, I'm going to show you in red line what the changes were from the last meeting, which you've already seen. Those have been posted to the website. This is very fancy. Never thought I'd be able to do this. What you see in front of you is in blue line is the suggestion of Councilmember Seekings, which is actually to include the oath in the ordinance. I did that. It's actually not written. I didn't see it written anywhere in our code. The first half, I think I've I've mentioned it to people previously. The first half is required by the Constitution for all public officials, including officials in political subdivisions. The second half is required by state statute, and same oath applies to the mayor and council members. You just substitute council member or mayor for whoever's saying it. The red line change is to just clarify Robert's Rules of Order still applies. If you breach order during a meeting, you raise it to the mayor. It's the same process as you would normally follow during a meeting. I just wanted to clarify that so there wasn't any confusion. I think everybody I've heard from is happy with the deletion of all of D that was previously in there. Probably the most debate will be about the voting requirements, but so I've shown in red line the changes I made, which you all have seen. I believe Councilmember Waring has suggested a 2/3 vote in order to set a disciplinary hearing. Councilmember Shade suggested a simple majority vote. I believe, I don't want to speak for them, I think Councilmember Del Chapo and Councilmember Rappel agree with a simple majority vote. And that's where that portion of it stands. I'm going to just go through and then we can do whatever votes we want. But anyway, that requires basically a motion, 2 additional members to second the motion, and then either a 3/4, 2/3, or simple majority vote to set a disciplinary hearing. So that's going to be at a meeting before you have the meeting with the hearing. Part 2 is going to be the disciplinary hearing, to the extent it passes the procedure in one. Councilmember Shade, purple is Councilmember Shade's recommendations, blue seeking's red, me. So Councilmember Shade suggested we take out repeatedly. If you're intentionally violating the oath, that you should be that council has the ability to sanction you for it, or if you commit a serious violation. I highlighted where the voting requirements are listed so that is easy for you all to address, whether it be 3/4, 2/3, simple majority in those cases. Councilmember Shade suggested, and I think Councilmember Rappel and Councilmember Del Chapo agreed, that they actually asked this question. I looked it up in Robert's Rules, and I've looked it up general law in other disciplinary proceedings. Just to clarify, the member is not supposed to vote. If you're accused of something, you're not allowed to vote during your own, on whether or not to have a disciplinary hearing, whether or not you should be disciplined, and whether or not you're sanctioned. I can't remember if that came up with a council member, nobody on council now, but a council member a few years ago. We had an issue arise, and I think somebody had asked the question about whether he could vote on whether or not to proceed, et cetera, but it never got that far. And section 2, I changed it. This is again, Councilmember Shade, to clarify, and it's been my intention from the beginning, this is only applying prospectively, not retroactively. We're not looking at something somebody did 2 years ago or anytime before or since. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The substance of the code of conduct is the same. It's the oath and not violating the oath.
All right, thank you, Chip. Looks like we had a number of recommendations there. Most of them, I think, stand alone. There are a few of them that might require some decision to be made on our part. So I'll just ask for any comments or suggestions from council. Councilmember Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Number one, I'd like to thank all the colleagues who participated in conversations on this from our last meeting to now. I think it's improved immensely. And I really do appreciate the extra consideration going above and beyond. I spoke to Councilman Shealy, who I think had to leave the meeting today early because of his daughter having an event he wanted to support. But he told me that he had not participated in, and he's a member of the committee. And some of the things I was discussing with him was fairly new to him. and he's a member of the ad hoc committee that initially sat down to put the ordinance together. I think we're close, and I think I really do respect trying to make it better. I really do. But I'm gonna ask for it to be deferred, Mr. Mayor, to get the fine pieces worked out, and certainly for a committee member like Councilman Shealy to be involved. I'm also gonna ask one other thing, Mr. Mayor. It probably was an oversight, but I'm gonna ask that an African-American be included on the ad hoc committee prior to this coming back to us. I've shared this with some members on council. When you represent a minority district, there are times when you represent minorities. Right now in our committee, racially, it's basically black-white. But in the near future, they're gonna be Latino people on this committee. They're gonna be Asians on this committee. They're gonna be LGBTQ people on this council. I say committee, but I meant council. When you come from a minority group, believe me, your vision and your experience in this country is different. When it comes to checking a box on the census forms, that's not an optional box for us. It's not optional, frankly, for Asians or Latinos. When you push against the consensus, a lot of times people look upon you as being an irritant. And what you're trying to do is represent the people that sent you to sit in a seat of respect and carry their voice. I think the voice of African Americans need to be a part of this ad hoc committee. I don't think it was anything on purpose. I think we need to include that, take this back to the committee, vet out the fine differences, and then bring it back for hopefully say a second and third reading.
Council member, can I just address that point?
Yes, sir.
This committee was not appointed. This was a volunteer committee. So anybody on council is welcome to serve on it. If you know, council members Del Chapo and Appel were kind enough to volunteer, as must have been council member Shealy, but I didn't appoint anyone. And it could be a committee of the whole if y'all want to all get together for another meeting of that ad hoc committee.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the first time this moment was the first time I heard that. So when the committee, most ad hoc committees with the city are appointed. Pardon my assuming that, but going forward,
yes,
certainly
sir.
I'd like to participate in the committee format.
Yes.
Let's not sausage on the floor of council today. Let's do the hard work in the committee, and preferably when we come back, we have an ordinance that we all can support and be proud.
Well, I think you're right. There's been a great improvement since the last time, but there are some decisions that need to be made. Somebody wanted 2/3, somebody wanted 3/4, and all like that. I think it's a good idea for y'all to get together one more time. Anybody that wants to participate can, and bring it back one more time. Does that sound agreeable to everybody? Councilmember Del Chapo?
I'm more than happy to bow out of the committee for somebody else to take my spot.
There's no limit on the number of spots.
I'm more
You're
than
not
happy
getting out that easy. You're not getting out that easy, Marie.
Well,
we're having so much fun.
Yeah. But just add to it, not take away.
Well, Keith, after the insults you wanted to throw at me last time, you can take it from here. And that you've refused to speak to me since. You can take it from here.
Councilmember Jackson.
What is she talking about?
Thank you. I agree that, it would probably benefit from going back to a discussion group again. And I do remember, Mayor, when we first brought this forward in December, you did say it was going to be a voluntary effort by anyone who wanted to sign up to be along with Councilmember Appel and Del Chapo to work on this. So that is what I know will be on the record in December. I'm sort of stuck on the word evidence based on the evidence presented during the hearing. So when y'all are meeting about that, could we, I just don't know what that would look like if we actually would have some sort of disciplinary hearing. evidence, you know, I would just like to know more about what you all were thinking when you put that word in the document.
All right. Councilmember Appel, I saw your hand up, and then Saccharin.
Well, there's all kinds of evidence. There's audio recordings, there's, you know, statements, there's testimony, there's all kinds of things that can be evidence at a hearing like this. But, you know, I was just going to say, you know, I think this has been a wonderful collaborative process. You know, Keith, you and I spoke a couple weekends ago for about an hour, and I got to tell you, I was very surprised to hear some of the reaction at the last meeting, and I wanted to get a better understanding of where you were coming from, and you put a lot of thoughts into my mind that I hadn't considered, and made a lot of wonderful recommendations, and they've all been incorporated into the ordinance, and I thought that was a very constructive process. So whether you knew it or not, you've been on the committee, as far as I'm concerned. But listen, let's get it right. We've come this far. And I'll also mention the person who recommended that the mayor be taken out of it was the mayor. And I thought that was a wonderful recommendation that he made, which I think takes away some of the concerns over you know, potential politicization, if that's a word, of this process. So I think we're getting there. I think this is a very clean, simple ordinance. But yeah, let's work together. Let's get it over the goal line. It's important, and we can finally put it behind us. Thanks.
Great. Councilmember Saccharin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question, and this is, you know, I think we're heading in the right direction as well, but maybe this is a procedural question for Chip. In an effort to reduce any potential political grandstanding or using this as a tool to bring up things that we shouldn't or in the public realm, if it's a personnel issue, could that initial vote, that initial hearing, be an executive session, thus eliminating any kind of like public comments that folks pick up on and take it the wrong way? Just a question.
If it's an employee, so you all aren't employees. If it's, and we had a conference call with our employment council. So to the extent it involves something between you all, it needs to be decided by city council. And there was a good Fourth Circuit case I read from 1997 that suggested it really can only be handled by city council. The kind of intent is that you all regulate yourselves. And in most cases, in many cases, you have qualified or sometimes even absolute immunity where judges and others don't regulate you, that it's your, I won't say it's your job to regulate yourselves, but it's your option to regulate yourselves in that respect. If it's a personnel matter, it's goes to the HR process, whether it's an accusation against somebody on council or within the city as an employee. That's a completely separate process. This doesn't apply to any of those types of issues. That's my understanding from our employment attorney, and I don't practice employment law, but that's sort of the overview.
All right. Councilmember Shade, and then I'm going to call the question on the deferral.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. McQueenie, would you mind just putting the rainbow color ordinance back up on the screen for us?
Yes, sir.
We still have a second.
Yes. Was that a second, Councilmember Griffin?
No, ma'am, it was not.
I'll second it.
So I think what this ordinance does, and my hat's off to Mr. McQueenie for serving as the conductor of all of this. He's taken in a bunch of information and questions and suggestions from several of us, and I appreciate how he's tried to incorporate it. So I just want to add my comments on this. The very first section of striking out when representing the city just makes this very clear, and that's sort of the purpose I think that we want to operate on, is that to sort of cut out as much interpretation and what we can be doing. It's very clear that we're dealing with the oath, period. At any point in time that we violate our oath, which is, according to Councilmember Seekings, added it in there. It's right there. It's clear as a bell That's our oath. We violate the oath, we're subject to discipline. If you go to the next page for me, Mr. McQueen, I appreciate it. And then no, go ahead to the second page, one more over. Yeah. So these other issues that I wanted to address is we shouldn't make this too complicated and make this a simple majority to move it forward for a hearing. And that really is just a difference of 2 votes. So majority would be 7 members versus 9. But that makes a huge difference on just getting the ball down the court, so to speak. And then 2 other points, taking out the word repeatedly, because again, that just makes it too wishy-washy. Is what does repeatedly mean, and how many repeatedly do you have to have in order to be subject and have the jurisdiction over this? Then the other 2 points is that, and Mr. McQueen answered this question for me early on. According to Robert's Rules of Order, the person who is the accused cannot take part in voting on this. And I think it's just out of an abundance of fairness to everybody. This is only going to operate for questionable conduct that happens in the future, nothing that can happen in the past. So this is a moving forward type of ordinance that makes it very clear and specific as to what our conduct is subject to review by ourselves. I'm okay with deferring it. I'll vote to defer it.
Call her after the meeting.
But I want to make sure that we stayed somewhat within is listed in these changes. I think this is a fair ordinance, and it addresses the questions that our constituents and our community has been asking about us to do.
All right. So the motion on the floor is defer. Councilmember Waring.
All I wanted to do, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the deferral on everybody's part, willingness. Ms. Del Chapo, if I offended you in any way, it certainly wasn't intentional. I didn't realize that I possibly have offended you last meeting or maybe anything I may have said this. I respect you too much. I respect all my colleagues on this council, because I know our efforts are in the right direction, trying to push the city in the direction that it should go. So that's not the intention. I really would value your voice around the table. I really do. So I hope you would remain on the committee. It is not my intention to offend you. So if I did, that was not my intention. And I look forward to working with you, because your voice is an important voice. Please believe me on this one right here. So look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All in favor to defer, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Any further business to come before?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Seekings and then Griffin.
Mr. Mayor, what I'm going to do is, with great trepidation and apologies to my fellow council members, because I don't think in 12 years I've ever spoken at the end of a long meeting. And so I'm going to do this very quickly, and I'm also going to ask for a little extra workload. But given what we now know, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, about reports from the Census Bureau and the work that we're going to have to do going forward about setting up districts before we have elections, I would humbly suggest that rather than at a city council meeting, we set up a workshop with Ms. Herdina and you, Mr. Mayor, to talk about what our options might be going forward in advance of November. And we're heading towards April with people having to put in their name in the hats in August. So I think in the April timeframe is probably a pretty good idea to get us all together with a well-publicized workshop, with our also ability to go into executive session to get legal advice from our team. So I just think we need to think about it now and get it scheduled. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
I would second that. Thank you, Councilmember Seeking.
I saw Ms. Herdina's Hollywood Square light up. Did you have a response or a comment to make to that, Susan?
Only just to say that Councilmember Seekings did reach out to me earlier with the same question, and to let him know that we are looking internally at what our legal options are to present to you all. April should be a good time frame. We also are looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, as well as taking a look at what we've done historically in 1990, 2000, 2010, if we've ever encountered this kind of a situation, which is unique, where the maps where the data is coming out so late. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at what our legal options are and presenting them to you, which is delay the election, not delay. And we should be ready to have a good discussion in April. Thank you.
Great, terrific. Councilmember
Thanks,
Griffin.
Susan.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to have something added to our next agenda, if you don't mind, sir. I've been following very closely the passage of this $1.9 trillion stimulus package. It was a very important item that we discussed during the budget process, that if we were able to get some local money from the federal government, that we would apply that to a rollback of taxes and not do a tax increase for 2021. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some clarity as to if we're going to get some money back. And I'd love for that to be on the agenda so that we could formalize that with an up or down vote as to our council members deciding whether or not we want to put it in a vote that we're going to roll back the taxes as soon as we get the funding.
Well, thank you. We do need to get that clarity of what the federal bill is, and we should have that, I hope, next week. I did plan, council member, on calling a meeting of our ad hoc budget committee. Actually, I think there's one scheduled or planned already, and this would be a matter we would take before them. But we would certainly be addressing that issue.
Well, sir, we voted as a council for the budget, and we formalized it vocally that we were going to roll back the taxes. I think it would mean a lot to our constituents if we took an up or down vote so that they knew that we're going to actually do that and not wait and hold on to the money.
I hear you got to find out what the federal government is going to allow us to do, but absolutely, we will address this issue, and we can put it on the agenda for the
Please,
next.
yes, sir. I'd like it on the agenda if you don't mind.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to say the same thing. My understanding is, well, the bill's not passed yet or signed, so we don't really know the details. But what we know from what the earlier version is that there could be some constraints on literally using our portion of whatever direct funds to increase our tax, our tax revenue. So I do think we need to, we don't want to promise what we can't deliver.
I just asked for it to be put on the agenda. I wasn't asking for discussion tonight.
Thank you, council members.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, on the last item regarding the deferral, I just wanted to make sure for the record, there were no nays. It was unanimous. Is that correct?
Is that correct? Did anybody vote against the deferral? Okay. Well, thank you all. And it's been a long and productive meeting, but I think very good. And we'll see y'all in 2 weeks' time for our next meeting, if not sooner. Many we'll see Thursday at Community Development.